Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Luffy Fanfics, back with Amazing Fanfiction. This is the second part of What if Luffy ate Goro no my Logia devil fruit and sail with Shanks. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Kaya gave him a surprised look. Klahadore. Luffy just looked at him with curiosity. Who's he? Usopp clicked his tongue in annoyance and looked away. Ugh, the butler. Kaya began to explain with a worried expression on her face. Listen, Klahadore, these people didn't come uninvited. They actually. Kaya was rudely interrupted when the man, Klahadore, raised a hand towards her. You don't have to explain. I will ask you about it later, he said rudely before turning towards Luffy, Nami and Usopp. Please, get. It was time now for Nami to interrupt him as she stepped up towards him and crossed her arms under her bust. How dare you talk to your mistress like that? Huh, aren't you just her butler? And for your information, the guards at the door let us through when we told them that we have official business here. She shouted at him with an annoyed expression on her face. The nerve of this guy, she thought furiously while glaring at him. Klahadore faltered at that and he now looked unsure of himself. One quick look towards a surprisingly reproachful Kaya told him that it was indeed the case. Hiding his embarrassment, Klahadore decided to focus on an easier target in order to pass the shame he was feeling towards someone else. He fixed his glasses with the palm of his hand as he looked towards Usopp with a gleam on his eyes. Both Luffy and Nami took notice of the strange motion but chalked it up to it being a quirk of the man. You're Usopp-kun. He trailed off as a smirk appeared on his face. I've heard some rumors about you. The villagers talk about you all the time, you know. Usopp changed his previously nervous expression into a prideful one as he pointed at himself with his right thumb while his left fist was put against his waist. Oh, well, thank you, Mr. Butler. You may call me Captain Usopp. Everyone calls me that. Klahadore ignored his words as he once again pushed his glasses up with the palm of his right hand. The guards at the gates were the ones that told me you had come here. They might have official business with Kaya-sama, but what you might want escapes me. Usopp faltered a bit as he looked at the butler with a perplexed expression on his face. Didn't the guards tell you? I told them that I was escorting them here. And since Kaya is my friend, well, I also used the opportunity to visit her, admitted Usopp at the end with a light blush. When Kaya smiled brightly at him, he only looked away as his face got redder. Luffy and Nami gave him looks of amusement. Klahadore also chuckled in amusement, but his next words proved that it was for an entirely different reason. I can see that you can certainly lie well. What? Usopp turned sharply towards him. The others also gave him looks of surprise. I've heard about your father too, he said as he pushed his glasses up with the palm of his hand and looked at Usopp with a condescending expression on his face. You are the son of a filthy and good-for-nothing pirate. I'm not surprised that you turned out this way. Friends with Kaya-sama. Huh, don't make me laugh. You better stay away from her. What a fucking asshole, thought Nami as she glared at him with her fists tightening and her knuckles slightly popping. She didn't know why, but there was something about this man that just pissed her off to the core. Klahadore, how can you say something like that? Shouted Kaya with a scandalized and slightly angry expression on her face. Usopp growled deep in the back of his throat as he gave a surprisingly intimidating glare towards Klahadore. He was slightly hunched over and his fists were tightening at his sides. Did you just say filthy and good for nothing? Ho ho, these two got more spunk than what their appearances might suggest, thought Luffy with some amusement before turning towards Klahadore and adopting a smirk on his face. I'm afraid you are grossly misinformed, Klahadore. Usopp's father is far from being a filthy and good-for-nothing pirate. He is the master gunner of the Red Hair Pirates, a core member of the crew of Akagami Shanks, one of the Yonko. Everyone looked at Luffy with wide eyes and a slightly pale face in the case of Klahadore. Luffy had never elaborated whose crew Usopp's father was member of, and he had never said the name of the man that had inspired him to become a pirate, which was why Nami was also shocked by his words. Klahadore, however, was shaken by the fact that he had just insulted someone directly related to a Yonko. Usopp was the first to recover and he puffed up in pride. Klahadore got annoyed by the satisfied expression on Usopp's face and scoffed. So what? A filthy pirate is still a filthy pirate. The son of one is no better. You and Kaya-sama belong to completely different worlds. I wonder why you befriended her. He trailed off before perking up as if figuring out his own ponderings. Is it money that you are hoping for? Name your price to never bother Kaya-sama again. Klahadore, shouted Kaya at the top of her lungs as she glared at him, surprising everyone since they didn't expect such an outburst from someone like her. That's enough. Apologize to Usopp-kun this instant, she ordered while narrowing her eyes. She knew that the only thing Usopp wanted from her was to see her smiling and happy. That was why he told her those obviously outlandish stories. It angered her to hear Klahadore say such things about him. Klahadore let go of his surprise and turned towards Kaya with an unrepentant expression on his face. There's no need for me to apologize to this uncivilized person. I'm just telling the truth, he declared before turning towards an increasingly angry Usopp. I actually feel sorry for you. You must hate your father, right? Because he's just a dumb treasure hunter who deserted his family and village. Kaya's glare matched Nami's now. Klahadore. Usopp's glare was positively murderous, and the capillaries of his eyes were so marked that they looked almost bloodshot as he growled out his next words. Say another bad thing about my father. I fucking dare you. Klahadore smirked condescendingly as looked down on Usopp and pushed up his glasses once again with the palm of his hand. Why are you so angry? You aren't very smart, are you? Why don't you spew your usual lies about him? Huh? You could have said that your father was a traveling merchant, or even that you and him aren't blood related. Usopp screamed. Shut the fuck up. Wham! And punched Klahadore right in the face. Kaya's eyes widened and she gasped as her hand flew to cover her mouth in shock. Nami smirked at the sight of the asshole butler getting what he had coming to him. Luffy gave an appreciative whistle. That was a good punch even though his form was horrible. It's obvious he has never trained in that art before. More importantly though, he trailed off as he grew serious and gave Klahadore a speculative look. He stopped himself from reacting to Usopp's punch. This guy is no ordinary butler. Gah, ugh, see, you are violent. Like father, like son, shouted Klahadore as he quickly found his glasses and put them back on as he pushed himself up to a sitting position. The left side of his face was starting to bruise, but he had a satisfied smirk on his face. I said shut the fuck up, shouted Usopp as he glared at the down Klahadore. I'm proud that my dad is one of the most infamous pirates. I'm proud that he is a brave warrior of the sea. You are right that I like to lie, but I'm proud of having a pirate's blood in me. I don't have to pretend I'm not. I am the son of a pirate, he screamed at the top of his lungs at the end. Luffy could only grin as he looked at Usopp. This guy, still sitting on the ground and smirking. Klahadore pushed up his glasses with the palm of his hand. You said pirates are brave warriors of the sea. Huh, don't make me laugh. Don't twist the truth. It's because you have that savage bloodline that you like to lie so much and use violence whenever you are enraged, he said as he stood up and dusted off his suit. I believe you only try to get close to Kaya-sama because of her money. Usopp gritted his teeth in anger. What the hell are you talking about? I only come here to tell Kaya stories so she can laugh and be happy for a short while. I have never asked anything of her. Klahadore seemingly finally lost his composure as he began to scream right back at Usopp. Who care what your motive is? The fact that your father is a pirate is more than enough reason for me to kick you out. Usopp got in Klahadore's face and grabbed him by his collar. I fucking dare you to say that again, he shouted with his arm cocked back and his fist ready to deliver another punch. Usopp-kun, please stop. Don't harm Klahadore anymore, shouted Kaya with a worried and desperate expression on her face. When Usopp faltered and turned towards her with a frustrated expression on her face, Kaya covered her eyes in a bit of shame with her hand. Klahadore isn't a bad person. He's just concerned about me. That's why he's a little extreme. A little extreme? Asked Nami incredulously as she turned towards Kaya. She pointed at the butler with a distasteful expression on her face. That guy is just being an asshole. He even has to bring up what he obviously knows is a sore subject for Usopp in order to prove his point. Anyone would become violent if their family is insulted in such a way, said Nami with vehemence. Kaya looked even more shamed now. I'm so sorry. Klahadore slapped Usopp's loose hand away from his collar. Get the hell out of here. Savages like you are not welcome here. I'll let you off this time, but I warn you, don't come here again, he shouted at Usopp. Usopp turned towards Kaya to see that she was just looking on in shame without saying anything. His face tightened in anger. Fine, I understand. Even I know when I'm not wanted. I will never come back here again, he declared before turning around and beginning to walk away towards the gates of the mansion. His gait hasty and his form slouched. Usopp-kun, muttered Kaya with a concerned and pained expression on her face as she looked at his fading back. HMPH, good riddance, said Klahadore before turning towards Luffy and Nami. He pushed up his glasses with the palm of his hand and inclined his head a bit. I apologize for the unsightly scene. I hope that your business with Kaya-sama proves to be fruitful. I'm half tempted to not conduct any business here, admitted Nami without hesitation as she switched from glaring at Klahadore with disgust and looking at Kaya with disappointed eyes. Usopp didn't deserve that. Klahadore didn't seem to care about her words. Kaya flinched before giving Nami an alarmed look. No, please, I'm sorry. Mary's business is his own. Whatever deal you strike with him for working on your ship has nothing to do with me. Don't let this get in the way of that. Please, she pleaded while looking at Nami and Luffy pleadingly. Klahadore straightened up. Kaya-sama, these people don't deserve your begging. Kaya turned to furiously glare towards him. Shut the hell up, Klahadore. You have caused enough trouble as it is. I won't let you ruin a possible business venture for Mary as well. And you and I will be having words later. Klahadore twitched but finally fell back in like as he nodded stiffly. Of course, Kaya-sama. My apologies, Nami, Luffy spoke, and when she turned towards him with an expression that told him she didn't want to conduct business here, he smiled placatingly at her. I understand why you are so upset on Usopp's behalf. I am as well, but we need our ship modified, and who knows where we can find someone else that can do it. Let's just get this over with. We'll leave these people in peace after our business with them is done, okay? Nami clicked her tongue but nodded her head with some reluctance. All right, she agreed before turning towards a relieved Kaya and pointing angrily towards the butler. I don't want to see this asshole's mug while I am here. That's my only demand. Said asshole's jaw visibly tightened. Kaya nodded immediately. Of course, truthfully, Nami wasn't the only one that didn't want to look at Klahadore. Excellent, said Luffy before turning around and starting to walk towards the gates of the mansion while waving lazily over his head. I'll go and take over the business at Pancake Town. It shouldn't take too long. Let's meet at whatever bar Zoro is drinking dry of their alcohol, okay? Oh, and don't forget that Sunny is waiting outside. Sure, Nami shouted back at him before turning expectantly towards Kaya with a raised eyebrow. So, what are we waiting for? I want to get this done as soon as possible after all. Kaya had no illusions about whether she deserved or not Nami's sudden aggressive and impatient disposition. She felt horrible for not defending Usopp a few minutes ago. She had been overwhelmed by his sudden use of violence against Klahadore, something that she had not expected from whom she had thought as a harmless and well-meaning boy that liked to be in her company despite knowing that she wasn't all that interesting. That day Kaya learned that there was more to Usopp than his well-intended lies. 000. Pancake Town was a few hours away from Syrup Village, but that was at the pace of a normal person, and Monkey D. Luffy couldn't be classified as such. With quite a liberal use of sorrow, it took Luffy less than 15 minutes to reach his destination. Pancake Town reminded Luffy a bit of Shell's Town, with the only difference being that the buildings weren't as tall and were a bit more separated from one another. The marine base also wasn't a prominent feature of the town, even if it was the biggest and tallest building there. What is your business here? The marine guard at the front gates of the base asked with a suspicious tone as he regarded Luffy. The black-haired teen merely grinned before pulling out Buggy's head from its bag. The marine guard blanched and turned sickly shade of grin when he saw the somehow still alive head of Buggy the clown staring at him with blank eyes and his tongue hanging out of his mouth. I came here to cash in Buggy's bounty. I know it says dead or alive, but do you guys accept kind of in between? He asked sheepishly as he rubbed the back of his head with his free hand. The marine guard looked at him without blinking for almost a full minute before nodding his head slowly. Yeah, just follow me, sir, he said before quickly turning around, opening the gates and starting to walk hastily towards the main building that made up the base. With an amused expression on his face, Luffy put Buggy's head back into the bag and followed after the clearly disgusted and scared marine. As he was led towards the treasury, Luffy managed to catch quite the interesting conversation between two marines that were idling around. Hey, did you hear? Captain Morgan and his bastard son Helmeppo were killed about 3 weeks ago. The other marine had wide eyes as he looked at the first one. Truly? By whom? Morgan was a corrupt and evil asshole, yes, but the man was quite strong and he could cut through a lot of things with that axe of his. The first one shook his head. No one knows. The Marines at the 153rd branch claimed that the assailant was cloaked from head to toe. After claiming that he was here to free Shell's Town from Captain Morgan's reign of terror and to recruit Roronoa Zoro, he put a bullet right in Captain Morgan's forehead. Roronoa Zoro killed Helmeppo after he was freed. The people of Shell's Town also claimed to know nothing. Damn, it's not like I will be losing any sleep over the two of them dying, but still. Damn. The first one nodded in agreement as he kept his grim expression. And that's not all. The Shell's Town Marine base was robbed almost dry. And the same day Captain Morgan was killed, Iron Mace Alvida had been turned in for her bounty. And guess what? That very night she broke out of her cell, knocked out everyone there that was awake, and escaped Shell's Town using a boat. The other Marine's eyes were wide. Holy shit. Do you think everything was related? The first Marine nodded. It's a very distinct possibility. Too many coincidences adding up for it to be otherwise. If it weren't for the fact that most of the Marines there had been injured, their involvement in the incidents might have been suspected, but they were clearly victims of a bizarre set of events. No one really knows what happened. As he walked away from them, Luffy hid a smirk. I'm not surprised those guys kept their word. They looked the sort. It also seems like Kobe didn't tell them about us being the ones that robbed them of their money. And if Alvida escaped, well, that's not my problem. I already cashed in her bounty. Whatever she does from now on is not my problem, he thought as he followed the Marine into the treasury. Other than a disgusted reaction at the sight of Buggy's head and being regarded suspiciously because of his get-up, Luffy made the transaction without issues. He did have to explain how was it possible for Buggy's head to be alive, and when they heard what he had done, Luffy had been unable to contain his laughter at their nervous and scared expressions. As he was leaving with the suitcase full of money, Luffy made sure to give every Marine a mock salute with it just for laughs. None of them had been amused, which just resulted in it being even funnier to Luffy. On his way back to Syrup Village, Luffy once again used Zoro to make the trek in less than 15 minutes, deciding that he didn't want to walk around carrying 15 million buri. He decided to take the money to their ship. He made his way towards the cliffs that were on the side of the island their ship had been anchored. He was about to use his lightning powers to fly towards the ship, but he blinked when he saw Usopp sitting there cross-legged, hands resting on his knees, and an air of solemnness surrounding him as he stared at the sea with a blank expression on his face. A quick application of Zoro had him silently standing behind him. "Yo, GAH!" screamed Usopp as he jumped and turned around with a scared expression on his face. "Shishishishi," chuckled Luffy before pointing at Usopp with a grin on his face. "You're sure scared easily. Anyone would be scared if you spoke behind them without making a sound previously," screamed Usopp at him, and Luffy's only reaction was to laugh. Usopp deflated after a moment and gave Luffy a curious look. "What are you doing here?" "I was going to take the money I got from Buggy the Clown's bounty to my ship when I saw you sitting here," explained Luffy easily as he shook a bit the briefcase he was holding in his hand and then sat down next to the curly-haired liar. I see," he began to say in understanding before trailing off as his eyes widened in disbelief. "Did you just say Buggy the Clown? The guy that has a 15 million bounty on his head?" Luffy chuckled at Usopp's over-the-top expression. "Yeah, it wasn't really that hard to beat him. His devil fruit powers allowed him to separate his body parts at will, so he only was immune to slashing attacks. I just had to use my flintlock and a few well-placed punches to defeat him." Usopp's eyes widened even more at his words. "Devil fruits, those are real." Luffy smirked as he nodded. "Yeah, they are very much real. In the Grand Line, where I'm planning to go after I get my ship modified and get a few key members for my crew, they are pretty common, all things considered." Usopp continued to stare at Luffy with wide eyes. "You are really planning to find One Piece and become the king of the pirates, aren't you?" Luffy nodded his head resolutely. "Of course I am. That's my dream, and I have already decided to dedicate my life to accomplish it," he said with so much conviction that Usopp almost physically felt it. Luffy raised an eyebrow at him. "Don't you have your own dream you want to accomplish?" Usopp lost his wide-eyed expression before turning to look towards the ocean. "I want to become the bravest warrior of the sea," he said before trailing off as his expression twisted somehow into a mix of melancholy and anger. "And find my dad so I can deck him across the face for leaving me and my mom here and never coming back in the past 10 years. Luffy laughed in amusement and delight at that. Usopp gave him a half-hearted glare. "Don't make fun of me. My self-esteem can only take so much punishment in one day," he said before sighing as he looked away. "I know my dreams are impossible for me to reach. I don't even know where I should start looking for my dad, and the only thing I can do better than being a liar is being a coward," he admitted with a self-deprecating chuckle. Luffy sobered up and he regarded Usopp seriously. "Seemingly impossible dreams are the best dreams to have, you know." When Usopp turned towards him with an unsure expression, Luffy smiled wryly. "I should know. Pirate King, remember, what's more impossible than that during the great era of piracy?" Usopp just continued to stare at Luffy in silence. "But I don't care how impossible it might seem. I don't mind how long it takes or how far I have to push myself. I will become the Pirate King or die trying." And Nami and Zoro, they are the same. I still don't know why yet, but Nami wasn't afraid to put her life in danger to get what she wanted. And Zoro's dream is as crazy as mine, to become the world's greatest swordsman. Did you know that the guy that holds that title is as strong as Akagami Shanks? Usopp's eyes were wide now as he stared at Luffy. The black-haired teen just grinned. "You think your dreams are impossible for you? That's perfect then. Now the only thing you gotta do is dig deep within yourself and find the resolve to push forward to accomplish your dreams no matter what. Become a pirate and sail the seas until you can punch your dad so hard that all his teeth fall off. Cowardice ain't the thing that's stopping you. That's all on you, Usopp." The curly-haired teen continued to stare at Luffy for a moment before he began to speak in a weird tone that was mostly a combination of pleading and excitement. "My eyesight is so good that I can make out things in detail as far as 2 miles away, and my marksmanship is so good that I have never missed a target when using my slingshot." Luffy raised an eyebrow and his mouth twisted in amusement. "A slingshot? You might want to consider getting something more lethal." "I'll get a gun then. It's all the same for me." Luffy snorted as a grin slowly began to appear across his face. "Is that so? Then," he trailed off as he stood up and reached for his flintlock. He twirled it around in a smooth motion until he was grabbing it by the barrel of the gun and presenting the grip towards Usopp. "Take this." Usopp stood up as well and took the flintlock without a word. He used his white sash to secure it to his person. Luffy regarded Usopp with a wide grin. "Are you willing to train until you are crying, sweating and bleeding, and realize that when you reach that point is when you should really start pushing yourself?" Usopp nodded without hesitation and a serious expression on his face. "Yes." Luffy's grin couldn't get any wider as he extended his hand towards Usopp. Welcome on board then, Master Gunner. Usopp's own grin was just as wide as he grasped Luffy's forearm and gave him a firm shake. Thank you for the opportunity, Captain. The two of them then began to laugh in merriment. Luffy because he found another member for his crew that had lots of potential, and Usopp because he finally got a real chance on becoming what he always wanted to become and accomplish his dreams. Usopp then sobered up as his happy expression turned into one of slight nervousness. Oh crap, how am I going to break the news to Kaya? Luffy also stopped laughing as he tilted his head to the side. I thought you were going to stop being friends with her after what happened earlier. Usopp shook his head. I would never do that to her. She only has Mary and that bastard butler keeping her company most of the time. I would never blame her for the way Klahadore acted. I'll just act like I'm angry and not visit for a few days. Then, when I come back, I'll tell Kaya that I'll only forgive her if she forces the bastard butler to apologize to me and my father while bowing on his knees," said a smirking Usopp with a surprising amount of vindictive amusement. "Shishishishi, that's kind of cruel, but I like it. You'll fit perfectly with us," said Luffy before patting Usopp on the back in a show of camaraderie. He then tilted his head as he saw something on the beach below the cliff, and he raised an eyebrow as he pointed in that direction. Speaking of the bastard butler, what is he doing there with that weird guy? Usopp looked towards where Luffy was pointing, and his eyes widened at the sight of Klahadore speaking with a guy he has never seen before. Why is he here? And who the hell is that? I've never seen him before. The weird and unknown guy with Klahadore was a tall and lean man with a long chin that had black and red strips and light-colored hair. He was wearing a dark blue hat, a matching colored jacket over a plain white shirt, green-brown gloves, light brown pants with a black belt, and black shoes with big white socks. On his face there was a pair of heart-shaped glasses. Why were you sleeping in the middle of the town alongside 3 other kids, Django? I thought I told you to not draw attention from the villagers, said Klahadore with a clearly annoyed tone of voice that matched the expression on his bruised face. The man named Django struck a pose as he looked away from Klahadore. How can I attract any attention? It's not like I'm weird or something. Luffy and Usopp exchanged looks and nodded. They went prone and decided to listen to the extremely suspicious conversation that was happening. Klahadore pushed up his glasses with the palm of his hand as he regarded Django with his annoyed expression. Are you prepared for it? Django locked eyes with him from behind his glasses. Of course, we can start Operation Assassinate Kaya-sama whenever you wish. Usopp's eyes widened in disbelief and anger as he heard Django's words. Luffy's eyes narrowed as his expression turned into one of seriousness as his finger dug into the edge of the cliff. They managed to keep themselves silent in order to not give away their position and thus learn more about Klahadore's treacherous intentions. Assassinate is such an ugly word, said Klahadore as he shoved his hands into the pockets of his pants. Django kept his pose as he regarded Klahadore with some amusement. Yeah, accident. We'll call it an accident. Isn't that right? He railed off as he tilted his head a bit. Captain Kuro. Luffy's eyes narrowed a bit more as he looked at Klahadore. After a moment he nodded his head. That's indeed Kuro of 100 Plans. When I was learning about prominent pirates on East Blue, he was one of the top dogs at that moment about 3 years ago. His hair is of a different color and his clothes make him look smaller, but that's definitely him, said Luffy in a whisper, not wanting to give away their position. But didn't he get caught 3 years ago and executed by the Marines? Asked Usopp before his eyes widened in a sudden realization. Wait, Klahadore showed up 3 years ago too. He's been planning to kill Kaya all this time. He whispered harshly as he glared angrily down at the two men. I still remember that day. It simply shocked me, said Django. Was the only sound made by Kuro made as his eyes flicked towards Django. Django struck another pose before he elaborated. You said you were going to give up being a pirate and made me the captain, he said before twirling around until he stood facing away from Kuro. Everyone thinks that Captain Kuro has been executed by the Marines, but you actually hid in this village and told us, your crew, to come here in 3 years' time to enact your master plan. Kuro simply turned to regard Django with an annoyed expression on his face. Django sat in one of the rocks as he rearranged his hat. Before, when I worked for you, the only reason I did so was because of the many benefits. I'll be getting a good share of the profits this time as well, right? Kuro nodded his head. Of course, if we succeed, you'll get your share as I promised. Django pointed at himself. Good, leave that girl to me. Kuro regarded Django with a sharp look as his left hand came out of his pocket and began to twitch slightly. Remember, simply killing her is not enough. You have to make sure that it looks like an accident. It certainly doesn't look like you are ready if you can't remember that crucial part of the plan. Bah, I'm completely ready, declared Django before raising a finger and holding it up as if he was a teacher explaining his subject to a class full of students. The Black Cat Pirates will come through the northern part of the village since it has been unused in a long time and thus no one would expect it. We'll charge in and kill everyone including your dear Kaya-sama. It's going to look like pirates acting like pirates. After that, you can claim her inheritance without issues. Kuro looked away from Django in disgust as he pushed up his glasses with the palm of his hand. I wonder if your mother actually gave you a brain. I have no familial relation to her, so how can I claim her inheritance just like that? Huh. Nuances like that can be worked out, said Django uncaringly. No, exclaimed Kuro as he turned around and approached Django before shoving his finger into his chest. The most important is that you have to hypnotize her before you kill her. Have her write my name into her will. I will leave all my wealth to my butler Klahadore. Do you understand? Usopp's entire body began to shake as his rage and hatred for Kuro began to reach a new crescendo. Luffy's hold on the edge of the cliff had long since pulverized the rock he was holding onto. Kuro continued speaking as he adopted a satisfied smirk on his face. That way I can openly claim her wealth. I've spent 3 years getting everyone in Syrup Village to trust me. As soon as she writes her will with me in it, no one will suspect me. Django gave him a distasteful look. Just for that you spent 3 years being a butler. If I were you, I would have just robbed them straight on. Kuro's expression twisted into one of annoyance. If I'd done that, I'd still be an outlaw and the Marines would still be chasing me. This plan will get me tons of money and keep the Marines off my back as a plus. I like using my head to find a peaceful way to settle things, he said with a smirk as he pointed at his forehead with his index finger. Django couldn't laughing loudly. Peaceful ways of settling things. You mean murdering her entire family is considered peaceful? When he heard that, Usopp became completely still. Kuro adopted a neutral expression as he raised an eyebrow at Django. What are you talking about? Her parents died of natural causes. It was Django's turn to raise his own eyebrow. Who do you think you are trying to fool? Did you forget that the ones that got you poisons you used to kill them and the one you are using to make your dear Kaya-sama a sickly girl was me? Kuro just clicked his tongue in annoyance and looked away. That fucking bastard, lowly growled Usopp as his glare was just pure hatred towards Kuro and to slightly lesser extent Django. Luffy's expression had by now turned into a fierce scowl as he also glared at the two men down below. Django gave a low chuckle. Whatever, there's no need to argue over little details like that. You just have to send the signal. Our ship has been anchored close by for almost a week now. They are getting antsy by all this waiting. His trailed off a bit sinisterly as he finished with a wicked smile on his face. When it seemed like the conversation was finally over, Usopp couldn't hold himself back any longer and he made to stand up and confront the two men right there and there. Before he could, however, Luffy stopped him by putting his hand on his back. Usopp turned towards him angrily only to falter a bit when he saw that Luffy was almost as angry as he was. Luffy shook his head at him and told him to wait for now. They watched as the two men then went on their separate ways after Kuro reminded Django to make sure everything looked like a pirate raid. Usopp shot to his feet and he glared heatedly at Luffy the moment he knew it was safe to speak as loudly as he wanted. Why did you let them go? We can't let them get away with this. I won't let them harm the village and I sure as hell won't let any harm come to Kaya. Luffy also stood up and he grimly smirked at Usopp. You know, where is this coward you were speaking of before? He asked and chuckled a bit when Usopp deflated a bit and looked away in embarrassment. Luffy quickly sobered up. Don't worry, Usopp. We are not going to allow them to complete their cruel and cowardly plot. However, if Kuro does indeed have the trust of the village, then we can't just simply kill him. Usopp reluctantly nodded his head in agreement. You are right, and I can't go and warn the village. They will just think I'm lying. Like always, muttered Usopp at the end somewhat bitterly and with a noticeably dose of self-reproach. What should we do? We know what they are planning to do and where they will be coming from, don't we? Luffy asked rhetorically before an evil grin appeared on his face as he raised his hands at chest level and began to pup the knuckle of his right hand with his left hand in quite the menacing fashion. I think we should give Kuro of the 100 Plans a taste of his own medicine. At those words, Usopp couldn't help but grin evilly as well. Zero. It was a pleasure doing business with you, Mary-san, said Nami politely as she inclined her head at the lamb-themed, tall and formally dressed man that was seeing her off. His hair was so curly that it looked like a lamb's fleece and he had 2 horns sticking out of it. Even his face resembled that of a lamb somewhat and his collar had a fleece around it. Nami had barely managed to hold in her amused laughter at the sight of him at first, but she had gotten used to it after their long conversation. Mary shook his head and bowed formally at the waist. No, Nami-san, the pleasure was all mine. I would also like to plead you to not hold the unpleasantness of earlier against Kaya-sama, he said before he rose up and regarded Nami with an almost pleading expression. Klahadore-san and I have been taking care of her since her parents died. I'm sure you can see how that will put her in a difficult position in regards to what happened. Nami sighed but nodded her head with a bit of reluctance. I understand. Still, the only one that was out of place was that asshole Klahadore. Kaya shouldn't have defended his words and his actions because there was no justification for them. Mary nodded his head. I'm pretty sure that's the case. Usopp-kun might be a little rascal and a liar, but I know he genuinely cares for Kaya-sama and that he only wants to see her happy. he said before giving a wry grin. Also, if I may, Kaya-sama might not look like it because of her sickly countenance, but she can be quite fierce and stubborn. I'm pretty sure Klahadore-san will be in the receiving end of a severe punishment for his actions and words today. Nami smirked at that. We can only hope, Mary-san. We can only hope, she said before giving him a short wave. I will be seeing you tomorrow then so I can take you to where our ship is anchored. Oh, I believe that my other companions will have more details about the things they want to add to the ship as well. Mary nodded at her in agreement and smiled as he waved back, satisfied with how things had gone. Nami turned around and began to make her way towards the gates of the mansion so she could procure Sunny and then meet up with Luffy and Zoro so she could tell them what she managed to arrange with Mary. It turned out that the lamb-themed man was the real deal regarding ship design, building or modification. While he focused more in luxury ships since he had quite the artistic mind, he was more than capable of using his skills for more practical uses. It also helped that the ship they acquired from Alvida was a carrack with 3 masts, which according to Mary was one of the easiest ships to modify without too many risks to the main structure, since what they were planning was to increase the overall size, sturdiness, and performance of the ship. The tentative prize for everything amounted to just a little more than 10 million buri, which was actually less than what Nami had been expecting. She thought that what happened earlier before the business talks had something to do with it, but she wasn't going to complain. Also, according to Mary, the modifications were going to be taking at least a week or so because he liked to be very thorough with all of his jobs. Nami was all up for that, and she knew that neither Zoro nor Luffy would mind much. Zoro could easily continue his training and drinking on land, and Luffy was the one interested on getting a proper ship, so she doubted he would complain. And there goes the trend of staying at every island we go to for less than a day, she thought with an amused giggle as she passed by the guards at the entrance. Her mouth twisted in distaste when she felt the lecherous gazes on her sexy and athletic figure. Now that she had no use of that kind of attention from them, she found it more than a bit disgusting. However, since she had flirted with them first to take advantage of them, she just ignored them as she walked towards the peacefully napping Sunny. I wouldn't mind if Luffy looked at me like that though. That stray thought made her blush a deep red. Nami acquired a pondering and fed-up expression as she stood in front of the minion lion. Ugh, I can't take it anymore. I have to do something about this attraction. It's obvious that he is attracted to me, but he just won't make a move no matter how many obvious hints I drop. I will have to take the initiative then, thought Nami in resolution as she adopted a determined expression. That was when the sleeping Sunny finally registered her scent and his nose twitched a few times before his eyes opened a bit blurrily. The great minion lion slowly rose to his feet and gave a powerful yawn as he stretched his back and leg. Nami, who was tiny in comparison, gave him an amused look. If it weren't for the fact that she was friends with him and that she had seen him act like a house cat many times in the past 2 weeks, she would have been disturbed by the sight before her. When Sunny was done with his waking up routine, he regarded Nami with a clearly curious expression on his surprisingly expressive face. Nami smiled up at him. I'm done here. Let's go meet up with Luffy and Zoro. Sunny nodded and he began to follow Nami as she led the way forward. Hey, Sunny, did you get a good nap? You sure looked comfortable under that shade, asked Nami with an innocent expression on her face. Sunny regarded her suspiciously as he slowly nodded his great head. Nami smiled brightly at him. That's wonderful. Do you think I can get a ride on your back? Please, she pleaded and even gave him puppy dog eyes as she cupped her hands together beneath her chin. Sunny's following snort in denial had her pouting morosely the rest of the way. Nami and Sunny reached the village proper a few minutes later, and it didn't take them long to find Zoro and Luffy. Since Zoro had not come with them to the mansion, it had been easier for her to deduce that he would go to the local bar to try to get drunk as quick as he possibly could, and she knew Luffy would be with him. She was surprised, however, when she saw that Usopp was there as well, along with 3 kids she had never seen before. The 6 of them stood in front of the bar, and both Nami and Sunny were quick to notice the solemn and serious air surrounding them when they approached. Nami also noticed that Usopp had what she recognized as Luffy's flintlock being held up to his person by his white sash. If that wasn't an indication about him becoming a member of their crew, then she didn't know what would be. That only served to make her more curious about the current atmosphere, since she thought that getting a new crewmate would have him in a happy mood, just like it had been when Zoro joined them. What happened? And who are the brats? Those were the only things she felt she could ask considering the situation. Sunny also regarded the group with a curious look as he ignored the odd and frightful gazes of the 3 brats. Usopp was the first to answer as he motioned towards the 3 kids. They are my friends and I trust them. We are going to be needing their help for tomorrow. Nami's eyebrows went up. Tomorrow? What's happening tomorrow? Luffy, a straw hat wearing teen, looked at Nami with a grim smile on his face. Let's just say that modifying our ship is no longer our first priority for now, Nami. I already filled Zoro in. Come on, I'll tell you and Sunny, but have to get out of the village first. Fair warning though, you are not going to like it. Nami looked at him unsurely and with a bit of dread building up. Okay. She trailed off as she watched the 6 males start to walk away. She exchanged glances with Sunny before the two of them shrugged and hastily moved to fall into step behind them. Even though she was unsure, she was still curious to find out about any new development, even though the part about her not liking it made her a bit nervous. Still, she wanted to find out. And Luffy was right. She didn't like it at all. 000. Nami-san, Mary, called out a slightly unsure Kaya as she stood on the beach of the southern part of the village. Nami and Mary stood at her side as she regarded the boat in front of her with some trepidation. Her cute little toes wriggling slightly at the feel of sand inside her sandals. Is this really a good idea? Mary also looked unsure. Well, this was proposed by Nami-san. I have to admit that I am unsure as well. Nami smiled brightly at the two of them. There's no need to worry. Didn't you know that stepping out of the house every once in a while is good for people that get sick often? She asked rhetorically before she adopted a slightly apologetic expression on her face. And I also want to apologize for how I treated you yesterday. You had nothing to do with how that asshole Klahadore treated Usopp. I guess I just got mad because you tried to defend his actions, but it never occurred to me until later that you know him better than I do so. She trailed off, smiling nervously at her near slip. Kaya blushed a bit and began to wave her arms frantically in front of her. Nami-san, there's no need for you to apologize. I believe that I deserved it for not siding with Usopp-kun yesterday. But I also knew that Klahadore was just worried about me, and that was why he became a bit zealous. She finished a bit lamely as she deflated. Nami put her fists against her shapely hips. No, Kaya, I insist. I heard that you have never been on a real ship despite Mary's hobby. I bet there are a bunch of cool things I could show you, she said in a tempting tone as she wiggled her eyebrows almost conspiratorially. Kaya giggled a bit at that. Well, I always wanted to go on adventures through the seas, she admitted, blushing again as she recalled that Usopp's fantastical lies were part of the reason of that desire of hers. She knew that his stories were lies, but she also knew that reality surpassed fiction. She had read about the wonders that could be found all over the world, and one of her dreams was to see them all with her own eyes. Kaya couldn't help but curse her sickly disposition for who knows how many times. Nami grinned and clasped Kaya's hands eagerly in between hers. Well, I don't know about going on actual adventures, but I think I can help you with the next best thing, she said before turning towards Mary. You said that you had to see the ship sailing for a bit in order to get more accurate information on how to modify it right. Mary immediately saw where Nami was going, and he nodded as he smiled softly. That would be correct. Nami turned towards Kaya. What do you say to trip around the Gecko Islands, Kaya? The light brown eyes of the blonde girl couldn't be filled with more excitement and happiness. Okay, let's go. As Nami and Mary helped Kaya get into the boat so they could go towards the ship, the Orangeette couldn't help but hope that their plan to stop Kuro's own plot and also reveal his true colors to Kaya worked. There was no reason it would fail, considering that they had the element of surprise and foreknowledge. But Nami couldn't help but worry. On the northern shore of the island in which Syrup Village was located, a massive but simple red and black pirate ship with a black cat as a figurehead, a pair of ornamental cat claws on the sides, and a green-based hull docked on the beach of the shore. There was a wide slope being flanked by cliffs in front of them that led towards the forests located north of Syrup Village. Django stood on the deck in front of more than 24 pirates wearing some type of feline ornament on them. They were brandishing all kinds of weapons, blades and guns alike, as they sported bloodthirsty grins on their faces while they looked towards the land. Let's go. Our plan is to destroy the village, kill everybody, and take every precious thing they have for ourselves, declared Django loudly. The Black Cat pirates responded with a loud bellow of excitement and eagerness. OOOHHH. They all jumped off the ship and landed on the shallow part of the beach before they began to charge towards the slope. It was when they reached it that they noticed the 4 figures standing on top of it looking down at them. One of the pirates called towards Django. Captain, there are 3 men, and his eyes widened and he began to shake a little when he noticed what the 4th figure actually was. A Memenian lion on top of the slope, see sir. What? Screamed Django as he walked forward until he stood at the front of the black pirates, and his heart-shaped eyes widened when he saw that there were indeed 3 men accompanied by a Memenian lion standing there. Were they expecting us? That's impossible, Captain Kuro, and I made sure that only the 2 of us and the rest of the crew knew about the plan. I didn't spill the beans to anybody, nor did any one of the crew, and I'm sure as hell that Captain Kuro didn't either. Django shook his head at those thoughts. Who are you and what the hell do you want? He bellowed towards them instead. The black-haired teen wearing a straw hat smirked as he pointed at himself with his right thumb. My name is Monkey D. Luffy, he said before he pointed at the green-haired man that had 3 sheathed katana strapped to his haramaki. This is Roronoa Zoro. More than one flinched at the name of the infamous pirate hunter, and Luffy's smirk widened as he then motioned towards the Memenian lion. The furry one is Sunny, and he trailed off before motioning towards the curly-haired teen. That's Usopp. Luffy's smirk turned into a savage grin. and we are here to stop you and that fucking coward Kuro from killing Kaya, Django. Shit, thought Django as he took a step back and began to shake in nervousness. Captain, one of the Black Cat pirates called out. There are only 4 of them. Even if one of them is a minion lion, there's no way that they can stop almost 30 of us. Django immediately calmed down when he realized that as well. You are correct. Attack my comrades. Our long wait shall not be wasted by posturing brats, he shouted as he pointed at them. The horde of feline-inspired pirates gave a loud bellow as they began to charge forward with renewed confidence. The bill of Luffy's straw hat shadowed his eyes as he grinned menacingly. Zoro, Sunny, do your thing. These guys are scum, so show them the same mercy they would have shown the people of the village. And Usopp trailed off Luffy as he tilted his head slightly in the direction of the curly-haired boy. Show me just how good my new master gunner is. Sunny bared all his sharp and wicked teeth as he growled and glared at the incoming pirates. His following roar easily surpassed the sound the pirates were making and made them visibly falter even though they were still charging towards them. Zoro quickly pulled out his bandana and wrapped it around his head, covering his head and shadowing his eyes in quite the menacing fashion. He unsheathed Wado Ikemanji and brought it up to his mouth, before he clasped it with his teeth. He grinned at Luffy in a savage and bloodthirsty manner. Roger that, Captain, he said before he unsheathed his 2 unnamed sword and charged forward at high speeds to meet the horde of pirates head-on. Sunny, who was actually a bit slower, was hot on his heels as he too ran towards the incoming pirates. Usopp trembled a bit as he wrapped his right hand around the grip of the flintlock pistol Luffy gave to him yesterday. Do I have what it takes to take a human life? He thought to himself as pulled out the gun and took aim with his trembling hand. He watched with widening eyes as Zoro began to swiftly cut down the pirates. They were foolish enough to face him, and Sunny began to use his teeth and claws to cut open throats and bellies in a very savage manner. Usopp swallowed the bile that had threatened to force itself out, and he began to think of Kaya and the villagers and what would have happened to her had he not learned of Kuro's plan. His eyes hardened and his shaking stopped as his pupil behind his googles widened and locked in one of the pirates at the far back of the group. If it's against bastards like these. He trailed off and pulled on the trigger. The pirate fell back with a bleeding hole right in between his eyes. I think I do have what it takes, he declared in his mind as he took aim towards another pirate and shot, resulting in another perfect headshot. Usopp bared his teeth as smoke trailed up from the muzzle of the barrel of the gun. If you think I'm going to let you even step foot inside my village, you have another damn thing coming. Luffy could only grin as he watched Usopp perfectly connect every single shot he made. It seems like marksmanship runs in the family, he thought in satisfaction before he looked down to see Zoro and Sunny making quick work of the Black Cat pirates that Usopp wasn't nailing down with his shots. I think Zoro is ready to start learning Soru already, and Sunny will be as well in about a week or so. I can't wait until they can use all the Rokushiki techniques, thought Luffy with his grin only becoming wider. Django, for his part, could only stare in wide-eyed horror as almost his entire crew was massacred by what could only be a demon wielding 3 blades, a demon beast and a demon with impossible accuracy. In less than 3 minutes his men were painting the sand of the slope red with their blood, either already dead by bullet wounds, ripped open throats and stomachs, or dying by bleeding out by wounds that were not immediately lethal from Zoro's sword slashes. The only reason he was alive was because he had pulled back the moment the fight, if it could even be called that, began. He could see the demon wielding 3 blades and the demon beast, covered in the blood of his comrades, slowly and menacingly approach him, and behind them he could see the teen with the straw hat grinning while the demon with the impossible accuracy slowly loaded some bullets into his flintlock pistol before taking aim directly at him. Django had no other choice but to call for backup. Nyambin brothers, come down. Both Zoro and Sunny paused when they heard this, and Luffy and Usopp looked on curiously to see what was going to happen. On the deck of the ship, a thin man cupped his chin in a pondering fashion. Hey, the captain is calling for us. Another man, this one more robust, turned towards the thin man. What? They haven't got to the village yet. Why are they still here? The two of them walked towards the front edge of the deck, and they looked down to see that their crew members were either killed or quickly bleeding out and dying. Their eyes widened when they saw a man wielding 3 swords and a minion lion standing not too far away from their captain. They wasted not time to jump down, and they landed protectively in front of Django. Sham, Butchai, those 2 killed our crewmates. We must get revenge before we can accomplish Captain Kuro's plan, declared Django as he pulled out his pendulum from the insides of his trench coat. They are extremely strong. I will hypnotize you to make you stronger and faster. Sham was a man of fairly tall height, standing at over 6.5 feet. His hunched back made him look smaller than he actually was. He had green hair that is parted to the side and curls at the end, with 2 other parts of hair on the sides of his head growing downwards in a curly-looking way. He also had cat ears sticking out from the top of head. He had green cat-like eyes. He wore a navy blue shirt with light gray buttons and a magenta bow tie. He also had light blue shorts, brown shoes and white socks that stick out of them. He had dark brown gloves with claws growing out at the end. Butchai was an overweight man who wore an outfit based loosely on a black and white cat. He had pale skin, sharp teeth, tiny eyes, and wore cat ears on his head. His pants were striped black and white. He also wore a yellow sash and dark brown shoes. There was a cape on his back that was striped light and dark purple with a white fluffy brim. He also wore a shoulder pad on his left arm and pale blue gloves with claws at the end. Sham nodded his head in understanding as he brandished his clawed gloves. "Go ahead, Captain Django." Butchai also nodded. "Hypnotize us. I will tear them and crush them to death." Zoro clicked his tongue in annoyance when he heard this before he charged forward. "As if I ain't got time to waste on fucking parlor tricks," he shouted, and he reached the two brothers before Django could do more than open his mouth to begin the process of hypnotizing them. Their claws clashed against his unnamed blades, and Zoro allowed a grin to appear on his face at their shocked faces. It seemed like they were not expecting him being capable of holding them back at the same time without visible strain on his part. Zoro knew that it was only possible thanks to Luffy's training methods. Django had a despairing expression on his face as he watched the Nyambin brothers engage Zoro in an extremely fast-paced duel of blades and claws that he could barely follow. He then turned his attention towards the Minion lion when it growled at him, and Django quickly grabbed his pendulum, which was actually a ring blade, and launched it towards the demon beast. Sunny swatted it aside with his own claws like it was nothing and snarled at Django. The hypnotist's glasses slowly fell from his face, revealing his heart-shaped eyes, and his arms hung limply at his sides as he stared at the Minion lion in resigned horror. "Fuck me." All the way up at the higher end of the slope, Usopp took aim towards where Zoro was fighting the Nyambin brothers. "Should I help him?" "Nah," said Luffy uncaringly as he shoved his hands into his pocket and watched what was happening with amused eyes and a smirk. Django was doing his best to keep Sunny away from him by running around the beach and launching those ring blades of his towards Sunny when he could, only for it to have no effect since the Minion lion was many times faster than Django and his claws were sharper and stronger than Django's weapons thanks to Luffy's training. Luffy could tell that Sunny was playing with his food. He then turned towards Zoro and grinned widely. "Zoro's got this. It wouldn't surprise me if he jumps in front of any bullet you shoot with the intention of helping him." Usopp looked at him with wide eyes before turning towards Zoro's fight as he lowered his flintlock pistol. After a few moments he snorted and smirked. "You know, Captain, for some reason I think that wouldn't surprise me if it turned out to be the case." Back with Zoro, as he clashed his blades against the claws of his opponents, he couldn't help but grin with satisfied delight. These weird guys are good. They might not be swordsmen, but skill is still skill no matter what, he thought as he blocked a diagonal slash from Sham with the flat of the sword on his right hand and countered a heel drop from Butchai with the pommel of the sword held on left hand and sent him flying back by applying less than half of his current top strength. 2 weeks ago, I would have been only capable of comfortably dealing with one of them, but now these guys are barely a warm-up. Deciding to end the fight, Zoro braced himself as he watched the Nyambin brothers attack him in a way that made it look like they were a bizarre mirror of each other, showing how coordinated and in sync they were. In a surprising move, Zoro stepped back and allowed their clawed palm strike converge closer into each other so he could use the flat side of Wado Ikemanji to block the attacks simultaneously. The eyes of the Nyambin brothers widened in shock at this. "What? This is the end of the road for you," shouted Zoro before he brought his two unnamed swords forward into twin horizontal slash attacks from his right side. His left sword caught Butchai in the stomach and cut through his skin, layers of fat and muscles, opening up his abdomen with an arc of splashing blood and making his innards spill out to the ground. With a scream of anguish and pain, Butchai fell to his knees and began to uselessly try to puck his intestines back inside. Zoro raised an eyebrow when his right sword only managed to cut off Sham's shirt, revealing that he was incredibly skinny. If it weren't for the visible muscles of his abdomen, it would have looked extremely unhealthy. "Butchai," shouted Sham in horror before turning furious eyes towards Zoro. "I will fucking kill you for that," he screamed before wildly launching himself at Zoro, forgetting in his anger that if he couldn't bypass Zoro's defenses while working in tandem with his brother, there was no way he could do it on his own. "I doubt it," said Zoro with derision before crossing his two swords across his chest and placing the blade of Wado Ikemanji horizontally behind them. "In your last moments, thankful. This is more than you deserve. Onigiri," he declared before jumping forward to meet the incoming Sham head-on. With his superior agility and strength, Zoro used a simultaneous three-way slashing attack to sever Sham's arms at the elbows with his unnamed swords and separate his chest from his abdomen horizontally using Wado Ikemanji. Zoro flicked off the blood of his two unnamed blades before sheathing them. He then took off Wado Ikemanji from his mouth and flicked off the blood that covered its blade before sheathing it as well. He watched dispassionately as Butchai bleed to death while staring in horror at the bleeding severed pieces of his dead brother. "You guys shouldn't have followed Kuro's plan. This is what happens to the scum that think they can do as they please and fuck others over," he said as he took off his bandana. It was in that moment that Sunny decided that he had enough playing with Django and knocked the screaming hypnotist to the ground with his claws digging into the flesh of his arms. Django's shrill screaming was abruptly cut out when Sunny used his fangs to rip out his throat, almost cutting off his head due to the size of his teeth and the strength he'd put into the action. Luffy grinned and sent a thumb up towards Zoro and Sunny. Nice work, you guys. If I remember correctly, the Nyambin brothers and that Django guy have a combined bounty of 16 million buried dead or alive. They are still recognizable, so we are going to be able to cash their bounties in. Sunny answered with a happy and satisfied roar before he began to make his way towards the beach. Even though he didn't like water, much less salt water, he needed to wash off all the blood from his majestic fur after all. Zoro snorted as he began to make his way up the slope, ignoring all the dead bodies and the blood. I think Nami is rubbing off on you a bit too much, Captain. Not in the way I'd really like, thought Luffy, a slightly perverted smile that he shook off after a moment. Now wasn't the time to have those thoughts after all. Hey, do you know how expensive is going to be getting a proper ship built for the Grand Line? Not only that, but what about the amount we are going to expend on provisions, equipment, and all the other things that we are going to need to sail for weeks on end without issues? The more money we have now, the less we are going to have to worry about it later and focus on other things like adventuring and keep getting stronger every day, he said in a wise tone. Zoro reached where Luffy and Usopp were standing by the time his captain finished talking. He snorted and waved it off uncaringly. Meh, as long as I've got booze to get drunk every day and someone strong to fight on a regular basis, I'm good. Don't make me repeat it some May times. Luffy just laughed and slapped Zoro across his back, getting a smirk and a shove from his green-haired first mate. Usopp secured his flintlock back on its place using his sash and removed his goggles from his eyes by letting them hang from his neck. What now? He was slightly pale and shaking, but Luffy knew that it was because of the fading adrenaline and the bloodshed in front of them. Despite clearly being the first time Usopp saw, much less being part of, such a thing, he could see in the eyes of his master gunner that he was going to be fine. Luffy smirked as he turned towards the forest behind him. Now we wait for the man of the hour. You guys can relax. Your part is done. I'll take care of the rest. Roger that, Captain, said Zoro lazily before he began to make his way towards one of the lone trees that stood on the cliff that flanked the slope on the right side. In his characteristic uncaring fashion, Zoro sat down and rested his upper body against the bark of the tree closest to the sea after unstrapping his swords, laying them on his lap. He put his hands behind his head and closed his eyes. Luffy wouldn't be surprised if he fell asleep shortly. Usopp saluted and nodded at him before he moved towards a rock that had a flat surface on the top. He climbed on it before he sat down cross-legged and also crossed his arms over his chest. Luffy noticed that his eyes would occasionally trail off towards the dead bodies of the Black Cat pirates painting the beach red with their blood, only to quickly look away towards the forest with a pale face and trembling arms and then repeat the process again. Luffy himself just began to patiently wait for Kuro. And it didn't take long for him to appear from the edge of the forest wearing his butler getup and carrying a briefcase. When his eyes widened at the sight of him, Luffy grinned menacingly as he spread his arms wide at his side, the bloodshed behind him plain to see. Well, hello there, Kuro of the 100 Plans. As a master tactician and strategist, I would like your opinion on my own plan to counter yours. Kuro paled as he stared at the blood and death-filled beach behind Luffy with wide eyes. Not a moment later his eyes narrowed and his entire body began to shake in wrath as his hold around the briefcase tightened. He glared at Luffy with hate-filled eyes. Do you have any idea of what you have done? Of what you have ruined? Luffy lost his grin and he lowered his arms. A 3-year plan of a coward that faked his own death and wouldn't think twice about murdering innocent people as long as it resulted in a peaceful end, right? Deadpan Luffy, and his savage grin came back with a vengeance when he saw Kuro becoming shocked again. Oh yes, Usopp here, and I learned about your master plan by coincidence when you discussed it with Django yesterday. Funny how the world works, huh? Shishishishi. A coincidence, muttered Kuro in disbelief as he stared blankly at Luffy with wide eyes. A fucking coincidence. Luffy's eyes quickly flickered to the side and his grin widened before he focused back on Kuro. Yup, a coincidence. We learned about your plans to hypnotize Kaya and have her make you the only beneficiated party of her will and then assassinate her to make do with all her wealth and live a peaceful life because of a coincidence. How does it feel, Kuro? Usopp noticed the same thing as Luffy and he quickly shot up to his feet and pointed angrily at him while growling. You murdered Kaya's parents and made it look like it was of natural causes. You used her broken heart opportunity to get closer to her, didn't you, you bastard? Usopp wasn't necessarily faking his anger and hatred at that moment. Kuro barely reacted with full body twitch. My plan, my carefully concocted plan, ruined because of a fucking coincidence, he continued to mutter in disbelief. Klahadore. That feminine and pained voice did get a reaction from Kuro, and he turned sharply towards the source to see a crying Kaya looking at him from a few feet away. Mary stood slightly behind her with his hands on her shoulders as he glared at Kuro with fury and hatred. Nami stood behind her at her other side while smirking victoriously and vindictively at him. Nami-san told us everything. I didn't want to believe her, but she trailed off as she turned towards Usopp and Luffy, only to sharply close her eyes when she saw the bloody slope full of dead bodies. She paled and looked like she was about to throw up. More than one person was surprised when she visibly swallowed her rising bile while trembling and shaking her head. Kaya opened her eyes and they were full of tears and raw pain. Are you not even going to try to deny it? After a few moments of staring at each other, Kuro gave a wordless scream of rage that made Kaya and Mary flinch. He quickly opened his briefcase and pulled out a pair of furred gloves that had full-length katana blades at the end of each finger that he slipped on. The eyes of Kaya and Mary widened when he suddenly disappeared from their sight. Both Usopp and Nami managed to catch his movement and they reacted to try to intercept him. Nami pulled out her retractable staff, enlarged in and jumped try to stand defensively in front of Kaya and Mary. Usopp pulled out his flintlock and tried to aim towards Kuro, would be taking into consideration his moving speed and momentum. Their eyes widened when they noticed that they wouldn't be capable of completing their actions in time. They shouldn't have even bothered. The eyes of Kaya and Mary widened even further when Kuro appeared in front of them as abruptly as he had disappeared. The katana blades of his furred gloves inches away from Kaya's face, which made her jump back into Mary with a gasp. Spittle and some blood flew out of Kuro's mouth as his throat met Luffy's bicep, who had moved to intercept him. The straw hat-wearing teen gave Kuro a look of disgusted speculation. Is that the so-called secret behind the unparalleled speed of the infamous Kuro of 100 plans? That's barely a bastardized version of an incomplete Zoro, said Luffy with derision as he then grabbed Kuro by his crushed throat and forced him to the ground with authority. Luffy ignored his pained grunt as he got in Kuro's face. I know that you are a coward that doesn't even follow a code, but I'm not. Captains fight captains, or did you forget that in the past 3 years? Whispered Luffy harshly before he pulled back and began to repeatedly punch Kuro's face in. Mary looked on with grim satisfaction, and even though Kaya was still crying and in pain and was even flinching a bit every time Luffy's fist connected with Kuro's face, she didn't make any move to stop what was happening. Usopp was just looking on with awe and satisfaction at Luffy pummeling Kuro's face in. This is the guy that will be my captain. I will make sure to work as hard as I can to not disappoint his expectations of me. Usopp swore right there and there. Is it weird that I'm finding Luffy almost unbearably hot right now? Nami asked herself as she blushed while watching on Luffy caving Kuro's face in. She shook her head of those thoughts and focused on the grimmer ones Luffy's actions brought up. He took down a guy with a 16 million bounty like it was nothing. Perhaps he really can. No, Nami, Luffy is a normal human and Arlong is a fishman. There's just no way Luffy can defeat him no matter how strong he is. I will give Arlong his 100 million biri and buy back Kakoyashi from him. That's the only thing I can do. Luffy finally stopped punching Kuro when his face was just a bloody bruise that couldn't be even remotely recognized. Bleg, disgusting, said Luffy as he looked at his fist covered in Kuro's blood, mucus and saliva, which he quickly wiped off on Kuro's shirt. He then brought up the whimpering Kuro to a kneeling position and held him up by grabbing his previously perfectly combed hair. I really want to kill you, no, but I believe that there's someone else more deserving of permanently ridding the world of you, trash. Luffy turned towards Kaya and he spoke before Mary could speak his words of protest. He looked at her seriously. Some naive people will tell you that you shouldn't sully your hands with this scumbag's blood and that killing him would just make him as bad as him. But ask yourself this. Luffy trailed off as he tightened his hold on Kuro's hair, making him give louder whimpers of agony. Would you condemn innocent people to die just to fulfill your own cowardly sense of greed? Kaya didn't hesitate to shake her head as her eyes began to harden and fury and hatred began to slowly replace the pain in them. Luffy had a grim expression on his face as he continued speaking. I am a believer of the proverb an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, and evil for another evil. Justice, punishment, vengeance. Those words don't matter. It's all the fucking same in the end. The only difference between them is who is claiming to do what and the reason behind it. What truly matters is that this scumbag gets his due. He killed your parents. He poisoned you and made you think that you were a sickly girl. He was planning to have you and everyone in the village killed. And all because of his cowardly greed. Usopp wordlessly hopped off the rock he had been standing on and approached Kaya. He twirled his flintlock around until he was holding it by the muzzle and presenting its grip towards her. Her face contorted in fury and hatred. Kaya grabbed it and ripped herself off from Mary's hold. She took a few steps forward and pressed the cannon of the flintlock against the place Kuro's forehead supposed to be. Tears trailed down her face as she glared down at him hatefully. You killed Mom and Dad. You made me think that my dreams would be impossible. Kuro tried to form words. Die, screamed Kaya as she pulled the trigger. The bullet went cleanly through. Kaya then began to cry brokenly as the flintlock fell to the ground from her limp fingers as she fell to her knees. Usopp was the first one to react, and he was quickly kneeling by her side and wrapping his arms protectively and comfortingly around her as he too began to cry as well. Tears were also falling from Mary's eyes as he watched on solemnly. Luffy released his hold on the hair of the dead body and allowed it to fall limply to the ground. He locked eyes with Nami, and the two of them exchanged short, grim and understanding nods as they just continued to watch on silently. From where he was, Zoro was also looking on with a solemn expression on his face. Hero of the 100 Plans died by the hands of the person he had wronged the most. True justice was served today. But in exchange, the pureness and innocence of a young woman was lost forever. After seeing that Kaya wouldn't calm down as long as they stayed there, Usopp and Mary decided to take her back to her home. Because of the serious atmosphere, Nami had to bite back her teasing words when Usopp just scooped her up in his arms like a princess and Kaya just continued to cry into his chest. A not now shake of Usopp's head also stopped Mary from protesting, and he had to settle with looks of disapproval as he followed behind them. Nami approached Luffy with a small smile on her face. That counterplan of yours went without a hitch. How did you know Kuro would be coming here to check what was happening after seeing the village not being attacked? Luffy smirked a bit and shrugged his shoulders. Truthfully, I wasn't completely sure, but that was the most likely scenario considering that the pirate raid was a crucial part of plans, he said a bit sheepishly before chuckling. On any case, I'm pretty sure that if he hadn't come and basically admitted to his plans, seeing them ruined would have inevitably ended in him showing his true colors to Kaya one way or another. I'm just glad things played out like this. Nami nodded in agreement. Yeah, me too. I'm truly sorry for Kaya, but in this case, a broken heart from someone that was never loyal to her in the first place is many times better than being murdered just to satisfy that same someone's cowardly greed. As you put it, she said with a sad and understanding undertone before she shook her head. What are we going to do now? Luffy looked at her seriously for a moment before sighing. He knew that there was a deeper meaning to her words, but he was going to be patient and let her decide on her own to share her troubles with him. The first thing we need to do is clean this mess up. Nina can eat the bodies, and tonight's rising tide will wash up the blood. Hiro, Django, and the Nyambin brothers have a combined bounty of 32 million buri. I'm going to cash it in. I just hope I don't get too much trouble, what with Kuro having being barely recognizable now, he said and chuckled sheepishly at the end before rubbing his chin in a pondering fashion. Maybe we can make use of their ship as well. Nami's body froze and her mind went blank when she heard about the bounty. When her brain finally rebooted, the first thing that went through her mind was this. 32 million buri. We had 45 million after cashing in Buggy's bounty. That would put us at 77 million. 3 million short of what I managed to get just on my own ever since I started to gather the 100 million to buy Kakoyashi from Arlong. In less than a month. If she hadn't been there to see it this whole time, she would have called bullshit. Luffy noticed her frozen state and got a worried look on his face as he started to snap his fingers in front of her face. Oi, Nami, you alright? Nami blinked a few times before she regained all her mental faculties back. Her face got a little pink when she realized how close Luffy was to her. She made no move to pull back though. I will take the ship back to where we anchored it when we arrived yesterday. Mary-san did manage to get a good look at it before I told them what was happening here, and he said he will be ready to start working as soon as you and Zoro tell him what you would like added. Luffy pulled back, smiled and nodded at her. He seemingly didn't notice her slight disappointment. All right, I just really want a proper hammock other than the overall modifications to the ship. I'm pretty sure that whatever Zoro would want would be related to training space and his drinking. Also, we have to ask Usopp what he wants since he is a part of the crew too. Nami adopted an amused expression as she shook her head. I still can't believe you recruited him. Luffy tilted his head to the side. Why? Nami shrugged her shoulders. I don't know. He just doesn't look the type to be a pirate, I guess. Luffy nodded his head without hesitation before smirking and crossing his arms. That might be true, but I just saw the guy kill 10 men with 10 bullets. All of them perfect headshots, with flintlock pistol at a distance of more than 100 meters. And his dream is to become a pirate and find and give his father, who's a member of the pirate crew of a Yonko, and deck him across the face. He's actually the kind of guy I want in my crew. I don't care how he looks. Nami couldn't help what she blurted out next. Then why do you want me in your crew? Her eyes widened when she realized what she just asked, and when she saw that his expression turned serious as he focused on her, she looked away in a slightly bashful display. As far as you are aware, my only motivation was to get 100 million buri, and thanks to you I have achieved that. Why would you want to keep me around? As she asked this, Nami couldn't bring herself to look at him. Because I don't think your goal was to simply gather 100 million buri. Nami, he said seriously, and he smiled when she turned towards him with wide and surprised eyes. I remember you said that you needed the money. Not that you wanted it. I think your real goal requires you having that money. I can't possibly imagine for what you would need that much. But someone willing to go that far to reach her goals is certainly someone I want by my side. My freedom. The freedom of my people. Not hating myself. Not hating my own dream anymore was what Nami thought when Luffy said that he couldn't imagine what she would need 100 berry for. She closed her eyes to prevent tears from falling down when she heard she also the type of people he wanted by her side. If he only knew the truth. You know you can tell me anything, right? That you can ask me to do anything for you. Her eyes widened when she heard his serious voice, and she was mesmerized by the smile he had on his face as he put a supportive hand on her shoulder. You are my navigator, Nami, a precious member of my crew. If you need anything, whatever it is, you only have to ask. Nami had to swallow some saliva to wet her suddenly dry throat. I don't want you to get hurt. She immediately cursed herself for saying that. Luffy filled that in for later consideration and decided to reassure her. I know it's not your fault for thinking that, and you don't know how much it means to me that you worry about me, he said meaningfully as he squeezed Nami's shoulder tenderly. He then smirked at her and pointed at himself with the thumb of his free hand. I have been deliberately holding back most of what I can actually do. I put myself some limits to my abilities for as long as I stayed in East Blue. If I can't become the top dog on these seas only using the Rokushiki and my base physical abilities, then I won't consider myself worthy of sailing the Grand Line. Nami's breath hitched at his words, and she looked at him like she was seeing him for the first time. What are you trying to tell me, Luffy? That there's no one in all the East Blue that can even hope to be a threat to me? He said so with so much confidence and sureness that Nami was shook to her very core, and she felt that she could actually believe him. Not only was he not boasting, but she saw him defeat Alvida and her pirates without using the Rokushiki techniques. Her eyes widened. Now that she thought about it, she had only seen Luffy use Rokushiki to show them to her and Zoro so they could visualize what they were trying to accomplish with their training. Other than Zoro, which was the easiest and first one you had to learn, she had never seen Luffy use the other techniques to win his fights. While he said that he used Shigen, it had been to kill Morgan, which meant that he had defeated him without using it in the first place. Other than that, he didn't use them against Buggy nor against Kuro. Luffy's smirk widened when he saw the realization appearing on her face. So, are you going to tell me? Nami stared at him for a few moments before she slowly shook her head in the negative. Can you give me a few more days, please? She pleaded him. It was one thing to realize that the possible solution to his troubles was standing right in front of her, and a completely different one to actually consider it as an actual possibility. Subconsciously, Nami always knew that getting 100 million berry wouldn't assure her that a scumbag like Arlong would sell her back Kakoyashi for that amount. That was why. Luffy squeezed her shoulder tenderly once again, and he smiled softly at her. For as long as you need, Nami, I'll wait. I will always be here for you. Nami couldn't resist the urge any longer, and she threw herself at Luffy, wrapping her arms tightly around his muscular torso and burying her face into his solid chest as she began to lightly sob. Luffy kept the smile on his face as he returned her hug just as tightly before pressing his chin against the top of her head. Thank you, Captain. As her muffled words, Luffy couldn't help but widen his smile. Anytime, Nami, anytime. Ozero. Usopp was at a loss right now. He, alongside Mary, had brought Kaya back to her home with the hope of calming her down, but she was still crying unconsolably. Because she had refused to let go of him, he had been forced to stay with her inside her room. Even though Mary obviously disapproved, one look at the crying Kaya clinging to him like a lifeline had been enough to convince him that sending Usopp away wasn't exactly the best idea at the moment. Mary had left the two of them alone after sending Usopp a warning look. Since Kaya was obviously indisposed right now, it fell to him dealing with the fallout of Klahadore, Kuro's betrayal. Since he also had the incoming responsibility of modifying a ship, he knew that he couldn't waste any time on that. Usopp knew for a fact that he wasn't good at consoling people, much less women that were sad and heartbroken. The fact that he had turned to lying to try and comfort his mother about his father's abandonment spoke by itself. He also wasn't very good with words. So, as he sat on Kaya's bed with her sitting across his lap and crying into his chest, he just wrapped his arms tightly around her and held her. Eventually, Kaya ran out of tears and slightly calmed down to the point that she was just constantly sobbing and sniffling. Usopp could feel that the upper part of his overalls was soaked with her tears, snot and saliva after all her crying against his chest, but he didn't mind in the slightest. Being there for Kaya when she needed was way more important than getting his clothes ruined after all. You must think that I am an idiot and a horrible person, right? Softly spoke Kaya, her sobs and sniffles making her pause here and there against her will. Her words greatly shocked Usopp, and he jerked back as he looked down at her with wide eyes. What? Kaya also raised her head, and Usopp could see that both her eyes and her face were red and swollen because of her crying. Let myself be fooled? By Klaha? No, by Kuro. For all these years. She paused, and her face contorted into an expression of self-disgust and self-hatred before she continued. And then, I barely hesitated to kill him after I found out about his true intentions. Usopp didn't need to be good with words to immediately deny the validity of those claims. Of course not, Kaya. he shouted vehemently, and he smiled gently at her when she looked at him with widened eyes. Kuro fooled everyone here, not only you. And if you are a horrible person for taking justice into your hands against the one that killed your parents, then I am 10 times as horrible for killing the men that were going to raid the village. Usopp was paying attention as well when he heard Luffy say that the reason behind your actions were just as, if not more so, than your actual actions. Kaya knew that if she had any more tears to cry, they would have started anew at Usopp's words. Her face scrunched up a bit as any notion of self-hatred and self-disgust were immediately kicked out of her mind by Usopp. She wrapped her arms around his torso and rested her head against his shoulder. I'm glad that you are here with me. You are one of the best things that have ever happened to me. Usopp-kun. Usopp's face became completely red at her words, and he shuddered a bit at the feeling of her warm breath caressing his neck. He shook his head in order to get rid of those thoughts before they even formed. Now was definitely not the time. Instead, he focused on the sudden nervousness that struck him. He knew that it might be the worst time to bring it up, but Usopp also felt that if he didn't tell her no, he would be making a grave mistake. Kaya. Usopp gulped nervously. You know how I always wanted to become a brave warrior of the sea and look for my father in order to let him know just what I think about him leaving me and my mother, right? Kaya pulled back away from him slightly and looked into his eyes with a frown as she slowly nodded her head. Yeah, she could kind of tell where this was going, and if she was honest with herself, she didn't like it one bit. Usopp began to sweat a bit. Well, I learned that my father is a part of a famous pirate crew that sails the seas of the Grand Line. Luffy and his companions will eventually head there. That's why they want Mary to modify their ship. And Usopp swallowed again when he saw realization appear on Kaya's eyes before a pained expression similar to before appeared on her face. Luffy offered me the position as the master gunner of his crew yesterday before we learned about Kuro's plans. And I accepted. Kaya looked away from him as her face scrunched up in such a way that Usopp knew she would be crying if she hadn't run out of tears already. You are going to leave. Usopp looked down, incapable of bearing the sight of Kaya being sad and in pain because of him. Yeah. After a moment of silence, Kaya suddenly took a deep, shuddering breath before she let it out in a resigned and sad sigh as she continued to occasionally sob and sniffle. I hate it, but I would never stop you from striving towards your dreams. Usopp-kun. She told him and smiled sadly when he raised his head to stare at her in shock. I just wish that we could have been together for much longer. Usopp blinked and a proverbial light bulb lit up above his head as her words made him consider something crazy. Kaya, that's it. I think there's a way for us to be together for a long time. Kaya, visibly shocked at his sudden outburst, was understandably perplexed. What? How? Her eyes then widened in realization and hope as she immediately caught on his intentions. Usopp-kun, you don't mean. She tried her best to not become too hopeful but failed spectacularly. Usopp grinned widely as he nodded his head eagerly. Yep, I mean exactly that. We don't have anything to lose if we try. We just have to speak to Luffy. I'm sure he would accept, he said confidently. Kaya stared at him in wonder as a smile began to appear on her face. The only reason why she hadn't used part of her wealth to travel the world and see its wonders was because of her sickly disposition, which was because of some poison that Kuro had been feeding her for years. And truthfully, after what happened today, she wasn't sure about staying at the place that held all the memories of Kuro. Kaya wrapped her arms around Usopp's shoulders and hugged him tightly. All right, Usopp-kun, let's do it. Perhaps doing something crazy and impulsive and getting out of here was exactly what she needed after what happened today. Usopp, just as hopeful and excited, returned her hug just as tightly by wrapping his arms around her petite form. I'm just glad you are no longer sad. Well, at least not for the moment. Now, how do I get Luffy to let her join the crew? A000. After feeding the dead bodies of the Black Cat pirates to Nina, who eagerly ate them all without complaint, with the help of Zora, Luffy decided to not waste any time heading back towards Pancake Town to get the bounties of the Nyambin brothers, Django and Kuro. To make things less troublesome, he had separated their heads from their bodies, which he also fed to Nina, and put them in a bag. That way he was just going to have to make the trip there and back once. After telling Zoro about Nami needing to know what he wanted included on their ship and ordering him to get Nina to tow the ship of the Black Cat pirate, which was named Bezin Black, he would later learn, towards where their own ship would be anchored since they were going to make use of it, Luffy made his way towards Pancake Town using Zoro. Like the day before, it only took him 15 minutes. Luffy was surprised at the ease in which he managed to procure the bounties, because it had been less than a full day since he brought in Buggy's comatose head to cash in his bounty. The Marines there knew that he was the real deal, and while surprised to see him back so soon, they still clearly remembered him when they saw him once again. Luffy had barely managed to keep a straight face at their reaction when he revealed to them the 4 severed heads of the wanted criminals he was planning to cash in for their bounties. After explaining what had happened, including the fact that Kuro had actually faked his death, Luffy had been able to get the money for their bounties with just a little trouble regarding Kuro's for obvious reason. Luffy also learned, much to his hidden amusement and surprise, that Morgan had been the one to capture Kuro and execute him 3 years ago. When they added what happened today to the many coincidences surrounding what he did at Shell's Town when he was there, he almost lost his composure by trying so hard not to laugh. That wouldn't have ended well after all. Luffy knew that the only reason he had managed to cash it in was because of some kind of weird test they did with Kuro's blood to confirm his identity, his possession of the 3 other heads of wanted men related to Kuro. The fact that the head was still kind of recognizable as Kuro of the 100 Plans despite the number he did on it and because he had saved Syrup Village in the process. Otherwise, Luffy knew that the proceedings wouldn't have gone as smoothly as they did. After the captain of the base told Luffy kind of jokingly that he couldn't come back to that base for the time being to cash in more bounties since they had barely some money left, Luffy made his way back towards Syrup Village with 2 suitcases containing 32 million at, and because he could tell that these marines were of the more decent sort like the ones at Shell's Town, was the reason why Luffy didn't seriously consider taking Nami to Pancake Town to rob them. When Luffy came back, their ship and the Bez and Black were docked not too far from each other on the beach south of Syrup Village, which told him that it wouldn't take long for Mary to start working on their ship. After putting the money of the newest bounties he just cashed in with the rest he and Nami had gathered so far, which he estimated to be around 77 million, and giving some affection to Nina so she didn't feel neglected, he made his way towards the village to meet with the others. He found Zoro, Nami and Sunny just hanging around and chilling outside the village's main restaurant. He told them that he managed to procure the bounties without too much issues, which resulted in a delighted Nami wrapping her arms around him and pressing her more than generous assets against him while beaming happily up at him. As Luffy very much enjoyed the pleasant feeling, he ignored Zoro's smirk and Sunny's confusion. It was after Zoro said what he wanted included in their ship's modifications and they got a pretty good idea of the things Sunny wanted, that Usopp, Kaya and Mary made an appearance and gathered the whole town. They told everyone about what happened and who Klahadore really was and that it was thanks to Usopp, Luffy, Nami, Zoro and Sunny that they were alive and well now. While the villagers were understandably shocked, since the information had come directly from the mouths of Mary and Kaya, who was the owner of the village and had no reason to lie about something as serious as that, they immediately believed them. Usopp was shocked and embarrassed when everyone personally thanked him for his bravery and told him that they knew that he was a great guy despite his constant lying. After the villagers went back to doing their own thing, Luffy and Co. approached the Syrup Village natives who once again thanked them for what they did to prevent Kuro's plans from being accomplished. Mary even said that he was going to do the modifications to their ship for free as a sign of his appreciation, and when Luffy told him about the Bez and Black, Mary claimed that it was only fair to use it as the source of the materials for the modification. Nami was particularly happy about the fact that she wasn't going to be spending a single berry to get what they wanted. That day Luffy learned that whenever Nami got very happy she would cling and press her body to him for some reason. He decided he quite enjoyed it and that he was going to try and make Nami very happy as often as he could from now on. Once again, Luffy easily ignored Zoro's knowing smirk and Sunny's confusion. Before they parted ways, Luffy got the feeling that both Usopp and Kaya wanted to talk to him. He had a fairly good idea of what it was about and honestly, he was all in for it. Kaya had impressed him when she had killed Kuro with barely any hesitation after she learned who he was. But his plans were in the fact that he had killed her parents and made her believe that her dreams were literally impossible for her to accomplish. So yeah, Luffy was not opposed to Kaya joining his crew. Quite the contrary actually. He wanted her in after seeing what she was truly made of. However, since it was something that she and Usopp wanted, he was going to let them take the initiative on this. But truthfully, they just had to ask. 000. The day after they deal with Kuro, Luffy stood in a clearing inside the forest north of Syrup Village quite early in the morning. Nami, Zoro and Sunny stood in front of him with various degrees of enthusiasm in their faces. Mary and his workforce were already working on their ship. Apparently, it was going to take no less than 12 days to get everything they wanted done, since they didn't have anywhere else to stay. Kaya had graciously offered to host them in her mansion, which had more than enough space for all of them. Luffy decided to make the most out of the next 12 days training-wise. Alright everyone, since we won't be sailing for quite some time until our ship is ready, we are going to focus entirely on training until that happens, declared Luffy with a wide grin. His stance was a relaxed one with his hands inside the pockets of his pants and his straw hat slightly tilted upwards. Zoro looked very eager. If there was one thing he loved more than alcohol, it was to train and gain strength noticeably after he did so. He had been becoming stronger and more skilled every single day after he joined Luffy and became the first mate of his crew. He had no doubts in his mind that doing so had been the best decision he had ever made regarding his path towards reaching his goal of becoming the world's greatest swordsman. Sunny looked determined. Luffy, whom he looked as his master and friend, wanted him to become the strongest minion lion that existed, even though he found the exercises Luffy put him through more than just a bit bizarre. He knew for a fact they worked. He was faster and stronger than what he ever imagined he would be. That was enough reason for Sunny to do as Luffy told him regarding this training thing. It also helped that Luffy was never trying to order him around and always had lots of meat and fish for him to eat. Nami just groaned and pouted. Do we really have to? She had finally gotten rid of the constant aches. While she no longer disdained training hard, she still hated the feeling of her torn and strained muscle fibers slowly healing to become stronger. She loved the gains but despised the pains, essentially. Yup, you are going to the Grand Line with us, and the stronger you are, the higher are your chances of staying alive, replied Luffy without batting an eyelash to her pleading puppy dog eyes. She would eventually realize that they were 100% ineffective when he was in training mode. With us focusing solely on training until our ship is ready, I believe that the three of you can learn and even master Zoro. Heck, knowing Zoro, I bet he will start learning Jeppo before we leave. While Zoro just grinned in satisfaction, Nami gave him a perplexed look. Luffy, didn't you say when you started training me that it would take me about 6 weeks to get to the point I would be capable of starting to learn the Rokushiki? It hasn't been a month since then yet. 27 days, counting today, to be exact. Luffy nodded at her, happily noting that she didn't deny the bit of her going to the Grand Line with them even when she no longer needed to, since she had already acquired all the money she needed. Yeah, but that was before I actually saw your actual growth rate. Also, I wasn't expecting you to put the kind of dedication you did to your training, he said, and his grin widened a bit when she blushed and bashfully looked away from him. He ignored his first mate's snickering and Sunny's tilted head. You were already deceptively strong when I met you. Right now you are actually quite stronger than what Zoro used to be when he joined us. A few more days of harsh training and you will be ready to learn Zoro. Nami got over her embarrassment and sighed in resignation. All right, I get it, she said before pointing at Sunny, who was just patiently waiting for the training to start, his tail swaying lazily behind him. What about Sunny though? Since he isn't human, I thought it was going to take him longer than even Zoro and I to reach this level, she pointed out. Luffy considered her words before grinning shamelessly. Hey, Sunny was already strong enough to make me actually feel his bites, which isn't as insignificant as it might sound. Besides, he's just plain awesome, right bud? Sunny replied with a happy and agreeing roar as he gave a feline grin. Nami just threw her hands up in defeat. I give up, she declared to the amusement everyone else. She ignored that and asked another question. So, what will we be doing for the foreseeable future? Increasingly more difficult leg-strengthening exercises for you and Sunny, and I will be personally teaching Zoro what he needs to do in order to perform Zoro, said Luffy before pausing and shrugging his shoulders. Other than that, sparring to keep our fighting edge up and to get used to your increasing physical capabilities. Not too different from what we normally do. Nami looked at him flatly. Just more insane than it used to be, right? Luffy gave her a thumb up. Correct. Ugh, seemingly tired of waiting. Zoro had an annoyed expression on his face as he spoke. Oi, Captain, let's stop wasting our time here. He couldn't wait to finally learn the principles of rank Yaku so he could apply it to his sword strikes. He knew that this type of training was progressive, and until he learned Zoro and Jeppo he wouldn't be able to comprehend the technique enough to change it to his needs. Zoro's right. The sooner we start, the faster we'll see the results. Nami, Sunny, grab the weights. You know what to do. Zoro, follow me, ordered Luffy. While a slightly reluctant Nami went to help Sunny strap his weights around him before she did the same for herself, Luffy took Zoro to the other side of the clearing to instruct him how to use Zoro. When Luffy told Zoro that the technique consisted in kicking off the ground at least 10 times in the blink of an eye, he was surprised that the concept was really that simple. When he voiced the thought aloud, Luffy nodded. It is. That's why Zoro is the fundamental technique of the Rokushiki. Make no mistake though, it's going to require its due time to master it, he said before using the technique a few times at a level in which Zoro could clearly see what he was doing to give him a better idea. He stopped in front of him when he was done. At first you will only be capable of using it to get short bursts of enhanced speed. You know you have mastered it when you can keep using Zoro indefinitely. Zoro nodded in understanding before he began to work, while he felt a bit ridiculous kicking against the ground many times as fast as he could. That feeling went away when he saw and felt himself move a few yards at speeds that he could tell were just beneath what Luffy had just shown him. With a grin and a noticeably increased amount of determination, Zoro began the process of learning Zoro. He was going to master this technique before they set sail again. That was a fact. Luffy watched him for a few moments with a pleased smile before turning towards Nami and Sunny to see them diligently doing their own exercises, which made his smile widen. Seeing them, he decided to do his own training. He went and sat against one of the trees at the edge of the clearing and closed his eyes as the bill of his straw hat shadowed the upper half of his face. When they saw him, Nami and Zoro thought he was just taking a nap. He was anything but actually. Because of all the years he spent training under his grandfather, Luffy actually had complete mastery over the Rokushiki, and he felt that comparatively, he was better at them than his usage of the abilities available to him thanks to having eaten the Goro Goro no Mai, even if those were pretty much mastered as well. What Luffy knew he was lacking at, in comparison with his other abilities of course, was using Haki. While he couldn't train Busoshoku Haki at the moment unless he wanted to explain to Zoro and Nami why his arms were being covered by a black substance, he could easily train Kenbenshoku Haki and Heishoku Haki, the latter to a certain extent. Since the former was essentially just about perception, he could train it without distracting the others from their own tasks. Heishoku Haki was a bit trickier. He couldn't just let loose the power of his will over the whole island. He didn't know how he would deal with the fallout of more than 100 people passing out after experiencing bone-chilling terror and despair. Instead, by internalizing himself through meditation, he could actually increase the strength of his will and the control he had over its effects. Luffy had learned quite early on that releasing his Heishoku Haki for training purposes was only useful if he wanted to increase the range he could encompass. Despite knowing about Haki for quite some time, Luffy never really got a real chance to exactly focus on it while training. That was why he knew that he had quite the long way to go before he could claim to have mastery over it despite being capable of using the 3 forms of it at will. However, simply mastering Haki wasn't Luffy's ultimate goal regarding his abilities. Just like he used some of the Rokushiki techniques to inspire the development of a few techniques using his lightning powers, Luffy wanted to combine the powers of his devil fruit with his Haki abilities once he mastered them. He didn't know why, but he had a gut instinct telling him that it could be done. Until he reached that point or found out whether it was even possible or not to do so in the first place, Luffy knew won't be satisfied with what he could do in regards to his abilities. Luffy was just starting to expand his range of perception with Kenbenshoku Haki when he felt 2 figures making their way towards the clearing. Knowing who they were and having been expecting them, Luffy stopped using Kenbenshoku and opened his eyes as he stood up. Nami, Zoro, and Sunny took notice of this, and while they wondered why he stopped his nap so soon and so suddenly for a moment, they went back to focusing on their training without saying a word. Luffy grinned at Usopp and Kaya the moment they walked into the clearing. "Well, hello there. How are you two doing on this fine morning?" he asked cheerfully as he walked towards them. While Usopp was an official member of his crew, he had not woken him up along the others for training for this exact same reason. He knew that he needed to come here together with Kaya so they could make their request. Kaya was the one who answered his question as she bowed her head slightly. "I'm doing well, all things considered, Luffy-san. Thanks for asking though," she said politely with a small smile. Luffy noticed that she no longer looked like she had been crying for an entire day. There was also a more grown air surrounding her in comparison to when he met her. He supposed that executing your parents' murderer, for both revenge and justice, could do that to someone. Usopp spoke a few moments after Kaya finished greeting Luffy back. His posture went completely straight and he even gave Luffy a formal salute. "Captain Luffy, sir. This humble master gunner has a selfish request, sir," he declared in such a loud voice that he also got the attention of the other occupants of the clearing. At his side, Kaya's smile became one of fond exasperation with a hopeful undertone as her eyes slightly trailed towards Luffy. The straw hat-wearing teen managed to contain his amused grin as he adopted a more serious countenance. He crossed his arms across his chest and raised an eyebrow while looking at Usopp directly in the eye. "Is that so? Let's hear it then." Usopp couldn't help the nervous gulp after seeing Luffy's expression. Still, he went on without hesitating or stuttering. "Sir, I know that I've been a member of your crew for less than 2 days, sir, and that I have yet to earn the right to request a favor from you, sir. But please, sir, I would like you to consider letting Kaya here join the crew as well, sir." Luffy's lips twitched imperceptibly as he turned towards the blonde-haired girl. He could feel the interested gazes of Nami, Zoro, and Sunny as they looked on from where they were standing. "Truly, you want to join my crew? To become a pirate?" he asked with some fake doubt, and he wasn't surprised when she nodded determinately at him. "In that case, tell me, what can you offer?" At that question, Usopp became positively hopeful and excited. It meant that Luffy was seriously considering it. Kaya also straightened up a bit more to answer the question. "I have never fought in the past. Before yesterday, I abhorred any type of violence. And while I still feel like I don't really have it in me, I now know that sometimes violence is what's necessary to solve problems permanently or prevent others from arising in the first place. Other than that, I have my quite substantial wealth and enough medical knowledge to patch someone up as long as their injuries aren't extremely serious or outright lethal." Luffy nodded his head slowly. "So, money and a budding medic, eh?" he asked rhetorically, but Kaya nodded at him despite that. He looked at her grimly. "The places I'm planning to go aren't pretty, Kaya. We are going to meet people worse than Kuro, and I'm not going to stand idly by and let them do as they please while they are making others suffer. You already know what I believe in, and that should tell you about how I plan to approach most situations." I promise you that what happened yesterday is nothing compared to the lengths I'm willing to go to serve true justice to those that deserve it. Knowing that, are you still willing to follow me? Kaya's expression noticeably hardened after her slight flinch at the mention of yesterday. Yes, as long as whatever you do doesn't make innocent people suffer, I'm more than willing to become a member of your pirate crew, Luffy-san. As long as I can reach my goals and accomplish my dreams without it being at the expenses of others that don't deserve it, I will follow you. Luffy finally allowed a grin to appear on his face. Then tell me, Kaya, what exactly are your goals and dreams? I want to see all the wonders this world has to offer. I want to make sure that no one suffers the same fate that almost befell me. I want to become a doctor good enough to prevent anyone that deserves to live from dying. And she trailed off at the end and her voice became soft and tender as she looked at Usopp with a slightly blushing face. I want to stay by Usopp-kun's side for as long as he'll have me. Usopp also blushed as he looked at her wide eyes. Kaya, Luffy let out a loud and delighted laugh. That's more than enough for me. Welcome aboard, Kaya. The eyes of Usopp and Kaya widened as they turned sharply towards him. While the blonde-haired girl began to grin in happiness, Usopp repeatedly blinked at Luffy in disbelief. Just like that. Luffy smirked at him and nodded. Yup, just like that. Holy shit, whispered Usopp before shaking his head and throwing his hands to the air in a celebratory manner. Oh yeah, Kaya, you did it, he shouted as he wrapped his arms around her waist, pulled her up and began to twirl her around as they laughed in happiness. Luffy allowed them to have that moment as he turned towards the others. Sunny didn't seem to care one way or another as he continued to diligently do his exercises. Zoro just gave him an uncaring and lazy thumb up before he went back to trying to learn Zoro. Nami just shook her head at him while giving him a fond smile that Luffy returned with a grin of his own before she went back to her own training. Luffy then turned towards the still celebrating lovebirds and called out to them. Boy, listen up. When they focused their attention back on him, Luffy spoke to them in a slightly serious tone that managed to convey what he wanted to get across with his following words. As members of my crew, I won't be ordering you around much and you can do pretty much whatever you want as long as it doesn't go against what we stand for and causes dissent between us. The only thing that I require of you is that you are constantly training to become stronger. I will not accept weaklings or lazy people around that are liable to get themselves and others killed because of something they can actually control. Both Kaya and Usopp nodded with serious expression on their faces. Luffy gave a pleased grin when he saw that they understood his point. Good. I know that Kaya is still incapable of training right now because of the poisons Kuro has been giving her the past 3 years, but I'm sure that will change soon enough now that he's no longer here to do so, he said, and paid no mind to her slight flinch when he said Kuro's name. He knew that it was going to take some time for her to get over what happened yesterday after all. He gave her an encouraging smile. So, to not waste your time, why don't you start expanding on your medical knowledge right away? That should give you something productive to do while you recover. Kaya nodded her head and saluted him. Yes, Captain. Usopp also saluted. And what about me, sir? Luffy snorted and raised an eyebrow as he smirked. For now, I will train you physically in order to make you capable of performing a few techniques I will show you later. Since your marksmanship is so good naturally, I will teach you how to fight using guns at all ranges. We'll see after that. Usopp saluted again. Understood, sir. When do I start, sir? Right now, said Luffy before looking at his master gunner with a flat expression. Oh, and Usopp. Yes, sir. Stop with that sir shit. It's fucking annoying. Yes, sir. Usopp saluted again before realizing what he just said and faltering a bit. Hee. Kaya giggled. Luffy sighed before he chuckled. At least he was now 100% sure that there was never going to be dull moment among the members of his crew. That was always a positive. Right. A0. With a dramatic flourish and proud expression on his face, Mary motioned behind him. I present to you your ship. It's honestly one of my best works to date, even if it was for a pirate crew. He trailed off before his eyes narrowed as he scowled at the ones that stood in front of him on the beach. I still vehemently disapprove of you doing something so foolish and dangerous, Kaya-sama. The blonde-haired girl merely smiled serenely at her butler. I have already decided to take this path, Mary. Since I am no longer sick, I want to see the entire world now that I can. I know it's foolish, but it's why I feel like it's the best thing for me right now. And as for the dangerous part, I will have the crew helping me gain enough strength to protect myself against any dangers we will face in the future. Indeed, after Kuro's poison was flushed out of her system and she was no longer consuming it, Kaya looked significantly healthier. Her skin was no longer that pale and her hair had a noticeable luster that was starting to match Nami's. She was also starting to fill out more since she had started to eat more and physically train in the past 10 days. It embarrassed and pleased Kaya that Usopp had obviously noticed and appreciated those positive physical changes. Mary clicked his tongue before focusing his scowl on Usopp. Just so you know, I blame you for this, Usopp-kun. With a serious expression on his face, Usopp nodded his head without shame. I accept all responsibility for the current circumstances, but I regret nothing. Mary's eyebrow began to twitch as an artery pulsed in the middle of his forehead. Why, you? Kaya hid her giggling behind her hand. Ignoring their byplay, Zoro whistled appreciatively as he looked at their new ship. I'm actually fucking impressed. Goat man over here might not look like it, but he is actually the real deal. I wasn't expecting this. Nami's eyes sparkled in wonder as she stared at the ship with the eyes of a navigator that knew they would be enjoying their time sailing with it. I love it. It turned out 100 times better than what I was hoping for. Even though he was enjoying the feeling of a happy Nami clinging to him, Luffy was completely focused on the sight before him as he laughed in delight and happiness. Now this is exactly what I'm talking about. That is what I call a real ship. Sunny was just laying down lazily next to Luffy, and Nina, who had thoroughly shocked Mary and Kaya when she had revealed herself to them, was slowly circling around the ship, clearly admiring her new charge with, surprisingly enough, critical and appraising eyes. The previously simple carrack with 3 masts now looked like a hybrid between a galleon and a warship, albeit considerably smaller than either of those types of sailing ships, with at least 2 times its previous length, significantly wider from starboard to port and taller by more than 3 meters. The rigging of the ship still had 3 masts, the fore, the mizzen, and the main. Luffy noticed that the amount of canvas it carried was particularly high for only having 3 masts. The fore and main masts were rigged with a topsail, a course and a topgallant, while the mizzen had a topsail and a mizzen course. At the bow were the forestaysail and flying jib, anchored with the bowsprit, and Luffy could see that both were going to be used for steering. The capstan, used to raise and lower the mainsail, was found on the main deck at the mizzen mast, which Luffy found very unusual since it was normally located at the foremast. Nami's boat, the one they used for going ashore, was going to put there as well. At the aft of the ship beneath the helm was the captain's quarters, which Luffy could see was actually 2 floors high and had potted land on the roof. In front of the second floor of the captain's quarters was the upper deck. The wheel was found here, and there was also a belfry that contained a bell, which could be useful on counting the hours and keeping track of time during the day. Mary explained that the crew's quarters were near the middle of the ship and that it consisted of a long hallway with 10 rooms on each side of it, and they coincided with the 10 circular crystal windows that were fairly above the ones for the cannon. He told them that each room was 15 feet square and counted with a twin XL-size bed, a closet, a nightstand, and its own simple bathroom and bathtub. How Mary managed to pull that off was anyone's guess, and when he said that he also managed to fit in a fully equipped kitchen, a dining room, bar, and an infirmary in that floor as well, the lamb-themed man seemed pretty smug about it but refused to elaborate. The upper gun deck, home to 14 of the ship's cannons, was also part of the main deck, but because of its width they didn't take that much space, which Zoro appreciated since the main deck was also their training area. There were also 4 swivel guns on the main deck, which would be used for more close-quarters encounters. The lower gun deck, which was located right beneath the floor of the crew's quarters, possessed 18 cannons. The bow and stern of the ship also had 2 cannons each in order to not leave it at a disadvantage during a pursuit. Also, the stern had a window above each cannon which they were going to use to tie the rope Nina used to tow them. The lowest part of the ship, which was the one that was partially submerged, was divided in 3 areas of different sizes according to Mary. The biggest one was going to function as the treasury, where they were going to put all their money and other precious things they got their hands on during their journey, and apparently it was so big that their 77 million buri barely took up space on it. The second largest area was just going to function as the storage room for all their miscellaneous supplies such as food, water, alcohol, reparations, resources, etc. And the smallest room was actually going to be Sunny's, who hadn't been interested in the proceedings until that was mentioned. It was almost completely covered in soft rugs and pillows of varying sizes according to Mary, much to Sunny's visible excitement and approval. On a side note, if it had been on their previous ship, Luffy doubted that the 50 million buri Kaya was going to bring with her would have fit inside the room they had been keeping their money. While Nami had been a bit miffed about Kaya only bringing in with her little less than half of her actual wealth, she was still satisfied with the amount. It also helped that Nami understood that Kaya couldn't leave her territory without money for Mary to manage, and that the Black Cat pirates had a bit more than 10 million buri inside their ship. That ended up pushing their current wealth to 137 million buri. Needless to say, Luffy had been enjoying Nami's extra happiness for quite some time now. Back to the ship. The main crow's nest was just beneath the highest point of the main mast, and there was a secondary, smaller one on the foremast. Since Luffy had yet to decide on a Jolly Roger, the flags were white and blank, completely matching the sails. The main color of the ship was a deep brown that actually matched Nina's scales. The frames of the windows for the cannons and the railings were a dark red, and it had a few black-colored accents here and there as well. And finally, the figurehead of the ship was made up by sculptures of the 3 animals that were considered to be the rulers of the environment they inhabited in East Blue: the Menian Lion, ruler of the mainland; the Sea King, ruler of the ocean; and the Senenryu, ruler of the sky. They slightly twisted around each other at the base, but around midway that stopped with the Senryu on top with wings spray, the Sea King below and to the right with its sharp teeth in display, and the Menian Lion below and to the left with its claws displayed threateningly. The three of them were shown to be roaring their fury and authority. After seeing that he had two of the three as members of his crew, Luffy figured he might as well go ahead and go with it. If he was 100% honest, it ended up looking way cooler than what he had visualized when he first got the idea. After she finished admiring their new ship, Nami turned towards Mary with incredulous eyes. "Were you only going to charge us 10 million buri for all this?" Nami was far from knowledgeable of such things, but modifying their previous ship to the point it looked like it did now had to cost at least 3 times as much as Mary had been planning to charge them. "Of course not," sniffed Mary in a clearly mock-arrogant display. "While I was planning on working your ship to the best of my abilities since the beginning. That was before you prevented a horrible tragedy from befalling us and before I learned that Kaya-sama will be joining you as well. I couldn't not give it 10 times my best and deliver you my finest work to date. Using the ship of those bastard pirates also largely helped to make this possible. I can say with full confidence that this ship, with the amount of sails it has and its hydrodynamic design, will be one of the fastest ships to ever sail the 4 seas in the Grand Line." Luffy's grin was almost splitting his face in half. "I believe you, Mary. You blew all my expectations away. Other than paying you what this masterpiece is worth, I'm afraid I don't know how to properly show my appreciation." Mary waved his words off before looking at him seriously. "Keeping Kaya-sama alive and well during your foolhardy future endeavors will be more than enough for me." He dutifully ignored the annoyed pout Kaya sent towards him for his demands. Luffy nodded without hesitation. Of course, by the time he was done with her, Kaya was going to have at least mastery of 3 or 4 of the Rokushiki and Kenbenshoku, Busashoku Haki plus whatever other skills she managed to pick up on their journey. As a matter of fact, since those abilities could be achieved through training, Luffy was planning for them to be the basic skills all members of his crew would strive to eventually achieve. Let it be known that Monkey D. Garp might have or might have not screwed a bit with Luffy's definition of sensible expectations when his future companions were involved. "So, what are you going to name it, Captain?" asked Usopp, breaking the slight lull in the conversation, and he shifted nervously a bit when everyone focused their attention on him. You know, even though this is essentially a new ship for all intent and purposes, it still used to have another name that you never bothered to change, right? I think it deserves a new name." Nami seemed to consider his words before she nodded. "I agree. Besides, we already performed the denaming part of the ceremony when we got rid of everything tying the ship to Alvida and changed it so it wouldn't be recognized. We only have to perform the renaming part," she said as she tightened the hold she had around Luffy's arm. She knew that he quite liked it when she clung to him, and if Nami was honest, she liked the feel of his muscular arm against her as well. Luffy turned thoughtful for a moment before he smirked as he looked at all of them. "I believe I have the perfect name for our ship. We can do the renaming ceremony just before we leave." Zoro crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow at him. "And when is that going to be? We've been here for 2 weeks. I'm sick of seeing the same shit for so long," he said before pausing and turning towards Mary, Kaya and Usopp with his expression not changing at all. "No offense, none taken." Luffy looked around and smiled when he noticed that everyone shared Zoro's sentiment to a certain degree. "Everyone, gather up your things and say your goodbyes in the case of Kaya and Usopp. We will be sailing away from the Gecko Islands within the hour." Aye, Captain." "000. Luffy stood on the forecastle deck of the ship, the bowsprit of the ship behind him, as he faced his crewmates while holding 2 bottles of their most expensive rum on his right hand and an empty glass on his left hand. Nami stood to his right and Usopp and Kaya on his left. Zoro stood slightly further away but directly in front of Luffy as he leaned his back against the foremast. They were all holding their empty glasses as well. Sunny wasn't interested in the naming ceremony, but he was present. He was sitting on his haunches next to the foremast with an even expression on his face. Nina, however, was looking at them curiously as she had enough of her body out of the water that she reached more or less half the height of the mainmast. Luffy could tell she was patiently waiting for Nami to set the course so she could tow the ship to maximize their speed and travel efficiency. "Everyone here has a dream," started saying Luffy as he locked eyes with everyone there. "I might not know exactly what Nami's dream is, but what little I know about it is enough to tell me that she wants to shake things up and oppose something or someone that doesn't care about other people being fucked over and getting shit on." At those words, despite Luffy smiling softly and patiently at her, Nami couldn't help but guiltily look away. She had told Luffy 2 weeks ago to give her a few days to think about telling him her troubles, but she had yet to even mention the subject to him after their heart-to-heart. Hearing him basically say that he was still waiting and willing to wait more for her to tell him was almost like a physical blow to Nami. Even though what I immediately want is to free Kakoyashi from Arlong's control, my true dream is to one day map the entire world. Maybe, she thought to herself before her expression hardened as she nodded resolutely to herself. Today, I will tell him today. I will believe in him. With everything that Luffy has done for her since they met each other, she felt that it was incredibly unfair and inconsiderate on her part to be wasting his time like this. Luffy's smile widened as he saw that. He could more or less tell what she was thinking, but he decided to not comment on it. He turned towards Zoro and his smile morphed into a grin. Our first mate here wants to become the world's greatest swordsman. The man he wants to surpass is on the level of a Yonko and is affiliated with the Marines and the world government. When Zoro proves himself to be better than him, everyone is going to lose their heads when the new greatest swordsman in the world is a full-on pirate. Zoro straightened up noticeably and he looked at Luffy with serious intensity. He had not missed how his captain worded his sentence. He'd said when not if. Luffy truly believed that Zoro accomplishing his dream was just a matter of time. The green-haired first mate exchanged a nod with his captain. He was going to make sure to live up to Luffy's belief and confidence in him. Other than his complete loyalty towards him, that was the least Zoro could do in exchange. I will not embarrass you, Captain, thought Zoro determinately as he tightly grasped the handle of Wado Ikemonji. Grin still in place, he turned towards Usopp. You want to be a notorious pirate and show your father your thoughts on his abandonment on you and your mother. Pirates are the sworn enemies of the Marines, the military force of the world government. Your father is an official within the crew of one of the Yonko, so you will have to become quite strong if you even want him to feel the beatdown you want to give him, and the world government doesn't exactly like strong people outside of their control, if you catch my drift. Usopp puffed up his chest slightly and crossed his arms over it. After 2 weeks of training under Luffy, he had started to become visibly more muscular and defined. He had also taken to use 2 flintlock pistols, which were held up by his sash, and there was a flintlock rifle diagonally strapped to his back. Instead of being intimidated by Luffy's words, Usopp was instead motivated to keep moving forward. After Luffy asked him to become his master gunner in recognition of his abilities and his part in thwarting Kuro's plot, Usopp had started to realize what he was actually worth and his potential. And Kaya is here with me. Even if I still have some major doubts and fears, I can't allow myself to let her see them. For her, I will be the bravest warrior of the sea, thought Usopp fiercely as he glanced at the blonde girl. Luffy then focused his attention on Kaya. You said that you wanted to see all the wonders the world had to offer, that you wanted to prevent others from suffering the same fate you almost did, and that you want to become an infallible doctor. As a member of my crew, I can promise that the first one is going to happen by default. The latter depends entirely on you, but if you put the same dedication to your studies that you do to training, I won't be surprised if you achieve it. The second one, the most cowardly and greediest people I know of are the world nobles. As long as they are in power, innocent people will suffer and die. They won't take too kindly to you opposing and fighting against them. Kaya smiled gently but determinately at her captain. In the past 2 weeks, the changes she had gone through were noticeable after the effects of the potion wore off and she started to eat more and exercise intensively. Her simple shirt, jean shorts and sandals showed off that fact. Kaya also had a knife strapped to each thigh since they were her weapon of choice. While she had yet to start learning how to use them, Zoro had suggested she start to walk around with them so she could familiarize herself with their presence and weight. I will do my best to not be a burden to you, Captain. I also promise to not be a burden to you, Usopp-kun. I will walk the same path as you as I strive to accomplish my goals and dreams, she thought as she tightened her fists and glanced towards Usopp. She blushed a bit when she noticed that he too was glancing at her from time to time. She thought that his own blush when he noticed that she noticed was cute. Luffy's grin widened even more. Me, I want to be the Pirate King, the freest man in the world. I want to do whatever I want, whenever I want and wherever I want. To do that, I have to not only find One Piece, but also become the strongest and most dangerous man in the world, he said, and his facial expression became decidedly savage as he said his next words. When the so-called powers that be realize just what I am capable of, they will stop at nothing to try and kill me. They will certainly try, but they won't live to regret it when they don't succeed. Everyone looked at Luffy with varying degrees of admiration after they heard his words. They didn't know what drove him, but his sheer conviction and his actions so far have proved that he wasn't just all talk. There was something about Luffy that just made them believe that he accomplishing his dreams was just a matter of time. They knew that the path he was walking on was a dangerous one, a path that will be as bloody as it will be righteous. Luffy's true justice and the current state of their world as they clashed will make sure of that. One of them would have to eventually give in, and something told them that it won't be Luffy, and they wouldn't have it any other way. With that being said, Luffy trailed off as he uncorked one of the bottles containing their most expensive rum. Everywhere we go, no matter what we do, we are going to be causing an endless amount of chaos and change. I feel like our ship, since she's going to be the one taking us to all those places, should reflect that. Which is why Luffy trailed off as he turned his hand holding the rum bottles upside down, and he began to let the expensive content spill on the wood of the bow of the ship. I shall name her the Tempest. Long may she sail the seas. Long may she sail the seas. The others declared loudly and approvingly as they raised their empty cups to the air with grins on their faces. Even Zoro, seemingly capable of reading the mood perfectly, Nina and Sunny gave their own excited roars. After that, a short celebration ensued as they drank the other bottle of rum while cheering. While that was happening, Luffy thought that he was only lacking a few other members for his crew and deciding on a Jolly Roger before he could finally consider himself an actual pirate. He still needed a cook at least before heading to the Grand Line after all. The Jolly Roger couldn't wait too much longer either. After the festivities were done for, Kaya and Usopp to the lower levels of the Tempest to do their own thing. Apparently, Kaya wanted to organize and personalize her room, and she convinced Usopp to let him do the same thing for his. The master gunner of the crew was going to keep checking on all the ballistic-related loot they got from the Black Cat pirates, which is where he found his second flintlock pistol and flintlock rifle. No one commented on them choosing rooms directly next to each other. Sunny followed them down so he could see his own room. Zoro simply said that he was going to train. Then he was going to see if the Black Cat pirates had at least good taste in alcohol before going to sleep. Those were the things he liked to do the most after all, and with Luffy not minding what anyone did as long as he saw they were diligently training and growing stronger, which Zoro was always going to do anyways, meant that the green-haired first mate could indulge as much as he wanted. Luffy and Nami walked across the main deck and past the proper hammock Luffy had commissioned, which was tied using the mainmast and a wooden pole that was a few feet away from it, and used one of the 2 sets of stairs that led up to the upper deck so they could stand in front of the helm. Nami pulled out her compass and map as Nina looked at them patiently, clearly waiting for them to set the course so she could do her job. When she didn't ask him for their next destination, Luffy looked at her curiously. "So, where are we going?" Nami paused for a moment before she continued what she was doing and answered her question with a tight voice. "Northwest." Luffy chuckled a bit. "I think you can a bit more specific, Nami." Nami turned towards him with a serious but conflicted expression on her face. "We are going to the Konomi Islands." Luffy raised an eyebrow at her. "Not that I mind, since I had been planning to go there before heading to the Grand Line. But any particular reason why are we heading towards the turf of Arlong the Saw?" Nami's eyes widened at first when she heard his words, but she regained her previous expression back quickly when she recalled him telling her about his desire to become the top dog on East Blue before heading towards the Grand Line. After meeting him and getting to know him, Nami didn't consider the fact that he knew about Arlong and was planning to eventually confront him. Surprising, she just looked away from him. "I grew up in Kakuyashi Village." Luffy's eyes widened before they narrowed. His teeth began to grind against each other and his hands balled into fists, his knuckles cracking. "Nami, please don't tell me." She nodded minutely without looking at him. "Let me set the course and get us moving and I'll tell you. I'll tell you everything." Luffy simply nodded in a noticeably strained manner, refusing to look at him yet but still feeling his intense eyes on her. Nami went back to work on setting the course. After she was done making calculations, she quietly requested Luffy to tie the rope around Nina before giving the Sea King her instructions. Nina nodded her understanding and submerged the moment Luffy was done tying the rope around her and receiving instructions from the Orange Jet. After the Tempest was moved under Nina's power to face the direction they were heading towards, Nami told Luffy to display all the sails, and with a quick application of Soru, Luffy did so before she could blink 3 times. The wind was on their favor and the ship lurched forward as it began to move at speeds that neither Luffy nor Nami thought possible to reach while sailing. To make it even more ridiculous, Nina's towing increased their velocity by a significant margin. It was enough to make them momentarily put aside the elephant in the proverbial room. "Oh wow, we are at least moving twice as fast as before. I don't think even Mary-san expected this." Nami exclaimed in wonder and awe, and her expression matching those emotions. She had made her calculations using their previous maximum speed, which resulted in the month or so that she had calculated would take them to reach the Konomi Islands had been reduced to around 2 weeks at the very least. Luffy nodded in agreement as he crossed his arms over his chest. "Indeed, as the future Pirate King, I wouldn't settle for less," he said as he turned back and watched as the island in which Syrup Village was located steadily decreased in size the further they got away. After a short moment, however, he sobered up and turned towards his navigator with an extremely serious expression on his face. "Nami." Nami took a deep breath as she too became serious. "All right, let's go to your quarters." I don't want the others to know. At least, not yet," she almost pleaded him as her eyes trembled a bit. Luffy simply approached her, took her hand gently in his and led her down the stairs towards the main deck where the entrance to the captain's quarters was located. They slipped inside, and the straw hat-wearing teen took his first look at the place he would be sleeping in for quite some time. The walls and the roof were painted red while the floor kept the natural brown color of the wood it was made of. At the back of the room, opposite from where the entrance was, there was a wide bow-type window that allowed him an unrestricted look of the still-fading Gecko Islands. There was a massive and quite fancy-looking four-poster bed that was bigger than king-size pressed against left wall. There were 2 nightstands next to the bed. In front of the bed was a circular wooden table big enough to require 6 chairs around it, and there was still a fair amount of space between them. In front of that table was a desk with its own cushioned chair pressed against the wall opposite to where the bed was. Luffy noticed that to his left was a hanger, and next to it was quite the big wardrobe. To his right was a full body-length mirror, and to the right of the desk was a wooden door that Luffy suspected led to his private bathroom. A candlelight on each corner of the room kept it relatively lit up. Luffy pulled Nami into the room and closed the door quietly behind him. He then released his hold on her hand and moved to sit at the edge of the bed. The captain gave his navigator an expectant and serious look as he lightly patted the space next to him. Almost meekly, Nami slowly walked forward and gingerly sat next to him, while she noticed and relished on the comfortableness of the bed and how her leg was slightly touching Luffy's. Nami didn't allow herself to be distracted as she began to speak after a few minutes of collecting her thoughts under the serious, patient but expectant gaze of Luffy. At some point he had even taken her right hand in his bigger left one, and Nami drew strength and courage from the simple, yet meaningful, gesture of support and affection. I was born in the Oikot Kingdom. I never knew my real parents. When I was barely 1 year old, they were likely killed by the pirates that attacked my birthplace, she said, and while Luffy noticed her bitterness and anger when she said the word pirates, he noticed that it was directed to those pirates in specific, whomever they were. I don't know how, but I survived, and I was found by my older, adoptive sister Nijiko. The 2 of us then were found by our adoptive mother Belmere, a marine who had been sent to fight off the pirates that had invaded Oikot Kingdom. As far as I know, the 3 of us were the only survivors that day. Luffy was silent as he continued to look at her. Nami took a shuddering breath before she continued with her story. After saving us, Belmere adopted Nijiko and we became a family. Even though she only had her tangerine grove as a form of income, she did her best to make sure my sister and I had clothes to wear and food to eat every day. I never appreciated all the sacrifices she made for Nijiko and I until it was too late, she said thickly as tears began to slowly fall from her eyes. Luffy quickly replaced his left hand, holding her right one with his right hand so he could wrap his left arm around her shoulders comfortingly, tightening her hold around his hand with her own. Nami didn't hesitate to accept his hug and pressed herself against him as she continued to cry. One day, 8 years ago, over something stupid I hurt her feelings and ran away from our home. She sent Nijiko after me. That was the same day Arlong arrived to Kakoyashi. Luffy just continued to hold her tightly as she continued her story. That fucking bastard, she growled hatefully through her tears. After subjugating the village with the superiority of fishmen, Arlong imposed a law, 100,000 buri per adult, 50,000 buri per child. She could have saved herself by denying the existence of Nijiko and I. She had only saved 100,000 buri. It would have been enough for her, but she would never deny being our mother, and used all her savings to pay for us. Arlong just mocked her love for us, and executed her in front of us, to set a fucking example. She screamed at the end with pain, sorrow, regret, guilt, self-hatred, and a myriad of other negative emotions that Luffy almost physically felt them. As her crying intensified, Luffy pulled Nami into his lap and wrapped his arms fiercely around her as he pressed his face into the crown of her head. Nami returned his hug back just as tightly, and she managed to calm down enough to continue with her story. I was always fascinated with navigation and cartography. He found the maps I drew of the Konomi Islands, and decided he liked them. He kidnapped me and forced me to draw maps for him. The villagers ended up hating me for it, and I ended up hating what I used to love, along with my dream to draw a map of the entire world. Luffy pulled back a bit so he could look down at her with a dark expression on his face. Nami, did they ever? He trailed off, and his voice was a deep, rumbling growl that originated from deep within his chest. Every single one of them is already dead, but if they laid one finger on my Nami, it was taking every ounce of the control he had over his powers to not let them respond to the rage he was feeling. Nami shuddered, both at what he just suggested and the growling tone of his voice. It reminded her of an incoming thunderstorm. She looked up at him and shook her head while maintaining eye contact with him. No, even though they didn't shy away from reminding me of my place. They are way too xenophobic against humans to even consider doing that. Everyone was relieved when we realized that. It was a silver lining to everything else that was our fucked up situation. Luffy gave a quiet sigh of relief. If Nami had been raped even once, he would have flown towards Kakoyashi and show them how superior those bastard fishmen were. He was still planning to do so either way, but their punishment no longer was going to include electrical castration. I'll break all their bones and let them die slow, agonizing deaths. It's the least they deserve for years of suffering they have caused. I will have to think of something special for Arlong. However, Nami unknowingly pulled Luffy away from his dark thoughts when she spoke, and she looked away from him as she rolled up the short left sleeve of her shirt. Arlong's symbol was tattooed on her left shoulder. I can't help but feel violated with this thing on me. It's a constant reminder. He struck a deal with me. 100 million buri. He would sell Kakuyashi to me for that amount and free me from his services. I have been doing everything short of prostituting myself to gather that amount. She then turned towards him again and smiled bitterly while tears still trailed down her face. And that's my story. Luffy felt his anger spike at the thought of Nami selling her body for money. He quickly shook it off and looked directly into Nami's eyes. We both know that he is full of shit. Nami's tears intensified as she shakily nodded in agreement. She was good with money. Currently, the inhabitants of Kakuyashi village had 27 adults and 12 children. At 100,000 buri per adult and 50,000 buri per child per month, Arlong could make more than what their deal entailed in 3 years. She always subconsciously knew that he was never going to sell her village back to her nor grant her their freedom. As much as she used to deny it, she had never truly given up on hope nor had wanted to do so. It was the reason why she had put her life at risk again and again to gather whatever sum of money she could get her hands on instead of just rotting away drawing maps for Arlong in the past 8 years. Nami could only shift herself until she was straddling him, which made it easier for her to hide her despair by pressing her head into his upper chest. Which is why you are not going to give him a single buri, Nami. When she heard his words, she shakily pulled back to stare into his intense dark gray eyes in confusion. What are you? That money belongs to you, Nami. He doesn't have any right to it. Just like Kakuyashi village is yours, and he doesn't have a right to it either, said Luffy, and he smiled at her fiercely when her eyes widened in shock at his words. I'm going to make him regret the suffering he put you, your sister, and your people through. I'm going to make him regret making you my navigator, my Nami, cry, and he is going to die knowing that it was all his own damned fucking fault. I promise you, Nami. Tears of relief and hope replaced her previous ones of pain and despair when she heard Luffy's promise. She believed him. How could she not, when she had seen him deal with 2 of the top dogs of East Blue without even trying? It was because of this that Nami's next action were understandable. With a happy laugh, Nami wrapped her arms around Luffy's neck and pulled his face close to her so she could kiss him. She poured all her feelings and all the attraction she had for him into it. Luffy's eyes momentarily widened in surprise at her actions, but his eyes closed as he began to enjoy the pleasant sensation, even though it was slightly salty because of her tears. The emotions he could feel her pouring into the kiss just made Luffy tighten his own arms around her. The feel of her straddling him and her bountiful, perky chest pressing against his firm, muscular one also made it even more enjoyable. Nami eventually had to breath, but she only separated their lips as she kept her eyes closed while slightly panting with a flushed face that was equal parts because of her early crying and what he just did now. She gently pressed her forehead against Luffy, whose excitement she could feel along with his own panting breaths against the lower part of her face. Knowing that she had this kind of effect on him sent a thrill of pleasure through her entire body. Thank you, Luffy, she told him meaningfully as she pressed herself further against him. He also wrapped his own arms more tightly around her. Any time and anything for you, Nami. And they went back to kissing each other. After assuring Kaya that she could do whatever she wanted to his room, which had earned him an affectionate, chaste and shy kiss on his cheek, Usopp went down to the lower gun deck, since he was the master gunner of the ship. This level along with the upper gun deck were going to be ones he would be in charge of. He had already checked the cannons of the upper gun deck, so he was now going to take a look at the ones here. It's going to take a while to get used to fire these cannons in an effective manner. Learning Sora will help, but with 36 cannons in total I will still need some help in the future, thought Usopp as he looked around the room. It was as wide as the main deck, and there were 9 cannons on each side and 2 cannons on each end. Since it was going to be the place he was going to spend the most time at, the room also had a few bullseyes at different parts of the room so he could practice his marksmanship and gun fu by shooting at them from every angle possible. Usopp was also pretty good at engineering, so he also had requested for a section of this room to function as his workshop. Usopp knew that his biggest strength will always be his ability as a marksman, which meant that the better and stronger the guns he used were, the stronger he would be. Usopp had a lot of ideas on how to make the guns he owned more effective, and he even had a few theories on developing new types of guns. Thankfully, he had managed to procure most of the stuff he needed to get started in the past 2 weeks, so he was set on that front for now. The first thing I need to tackle is the reloading issue. The magazine idea shows promise, but I will have to find a way to apply it without compromising the structure and flintlock mechanisms of the pistols and rifle, but with a few modifications I think I can pull it off, thought Usopp as he walked towards the portion of the room that held all their ballistics-related loot and equipment. Usopp knew that this was the stuff that used to belong to the Buggy Pirates and Black Cat Pirates. He also put his own stuff there as well. Well, time to do some inventory, he said with a determined grin before he began to work on that. Since he was also going to manage his own logistic as well, he needed to keep track of the amount of everything he had so he could know exactly when he would need to restock. It was as he was emptying one of the barrels in which Nami had told him she had dumped some of the stuff she had liberated from Buggy that turned out to no have any monetary value that Usopp found a folded-in piece of paper with a few words scribbled in one of the sides. According to Nami herself, she had just shoved everything she got her hands into her bags. Usopp was also thankful that along with his treasure Buggy had put everything else he had on the tent he had erected on the docks when he had been looting Orange Town, and that Luffy, Zoro, and Nami had also taken it with them. Apparently, those red cannonballs with Buggy's symbols painted on them had enough explosive power to completely obliterate a normal ship. At the moment they only had a full barrel's worth of them, which meant that their use was going to be limited. It was truly a shame that he didn't know how to make them hymns. Buggy's flashy explosive formula. He read and trailed off as the meaning of the words sank in. With eyes wide in excitement, Usopp hurriedly unfolded the paper and began to read its contents in a manner that resembled a thirsty man in the desert finding fresh water for the first time in days. Slowly, a massive grin that was equal parts elation and evilness appeared on Usopp's face. Mwahaha. When she heard maniacal laughter coming from the level below, Kaya momentarily stopped arranging the covers of her bed. She smiled fondly when she identified her, more than friend but not quite romantic partner yet being the one laughing. I'm glad Usopp-kun is having fun. He sounds so happy, she exclaimed excitedly before she began to hum a happy tune as she went back to what had been doing. 000. It was a few days after Luffy and Co left that Alvida arrived to the Gecko Islands. Even though she had sailed the same distance from the Orange Islands as her target, she lacked not only Nami's navigational skills but also a Sea King to tow her Doni, which sailed at a significantly lower speed than full-fledged ship. That was why she was arriving here only now. Alvida made sure that her boat won't be pulled back into the sea before she turned towards what she knew to be Syrup Village. She had a loving expression on her face as she began to make her way towards the modest settlement. I'm sure Luffy-sama spent a significant amount of time here. I can feel it. I just need to find someone who knows in which direction he went so I can finally reunite with him, she declared fervently. When she reached the village, Alvida learned about what Luffy and the others did here. Learning that Luffy saved all this people from Kuro of 100 plants and his black cat pirates only resulted in Alvida's love and admiration for him growing even more. His apparent brutality when he had dealt with them had Alvida getting more than a little hot under the collar, and she knew that her session self-gratification would be particularly intense that night as she imagined Luffy slaughtering dozens of men with a savage grin on his handsome face. When she learned from a lamb-themed man that he had sailed in the northwest direction, Alvida finally saw a pattern that would allow her to more or less predict where Luffy would be going next. Luffy-sama is going for all the big shots of East Blue after all. He would have gone after Foul Play Creek if he hadn't taken his fleet to try his luck against the Grand Line not too long ago. Since he is heading northwest, that means he is now going after Arlong the Salt. It might be possible he runs into El Drago as well, she thought to herself as she sailed away from the Gecko Islands after using her beauty to restock her supplies for free. She couldn't waste any time after all. A man like her, Luffy-sama, would inevitably head into the Grand Line, so she needed to reach him before that happened. In the meantime, to make sure he would accept her, Alvida decided she would continue to increase her physical capabilities and her mastery with her devil fruit abilities. She knew that her Luffy-sama was a man that respected strength and that he would only allow those that he deemed strong to be by his side. Since that was what Alvida wanted the most, she'll become the strongest she could be to be worthy of her Luffy-sama. 000. Luffy had a pleased and proud grin on his face as he watched Nami using Soru to perform short burst of speed successfully across the main deck of the Tempest. Instead of taking her 6 weeks to become ready to start learning the most fundamental Rokushiki technique, it had taken her that amount to actually learn it. Nami stopped using Soru when she stood right in front of Luffy with a grin of her own, and she put her hands on her shapely waist and cocked it to the side. So, she trailed off, looking up at him expectantly. He gave her a thumb up. You finally learned how to do it, Nami. And it only took you one day after Sunny. He praised her and ignored her twitching eyebrow at the reminder that the oversized house cat had managed to learn the technique before her despite starting training on it at a significant later time than her. You still have to master it though, but that will come with more training and experience. Nami gave a small sigh. And until that happens, I won't be able to learn Jeppo and later Rankyaku. I know, she said wryly before he could say it himself. She smirked at his petulant pout because of her interruption. Not commenting on it, she went for her next question. What am I going to work on next then? Luffy stopped pouting at that and he rubbed his chin in a considering fashion. Other than daily spars against me so you can get used to using Soru in combat, I believe you should now focus on Kami. Since you finally learned Soru, it shouldn't take you too long to get that one too. Nami didn't bat an eyelash at the thought of fighting him. She just groaned as she adopted a mock-wincing expression as she began to tenderly rub her arms. "Am I back to dodging pebbles?" she asked him in a whining voice full of dread before she pointed towards where Zoro was. "Why isn't he doing it as well then? He's just been trying to master Zoro for the past 3 weeks." The green-haired first mate had a serious expression on his face as wielded his 3 swords while using Zoro to move across his side of the main deck. Luffy wouldn't be surprised if Zoro managed to master Zoro in the next few days. He was already going through his katas while enhanced during long periods of time. Zoro had claimed that he still was forced to end the technique but that he could feel he was extremely close to achieving mastery. That's because Zoro doesn't want to learn it and Kami doesn't really go well with his own style of fighting, explained Luffy with a shrug. Even though he thought it wouldn't hurt Zoro to learn the Rokushiki dodging technique, Luffy was not going to force him to do so. Zoro knew what he was doing after all. Nami was a different story though. He raised an eyebrow at her. "Speaking of fighting styles, have you finally decided with which kind of weapon you will replace your staff?" Nami smirked and nodded her head in the affirmative. "Yep, after considering all the weapons you told me about, I think the best one would be a halberd since it can be used for both piercing and slashing attacks. If I apply the style I use when wielding my staff, those types of attacks would be the ones I use the most." Luffy blinked before nodding thoughtfully. I guess that's true. We'll have to buy you one the moment we come across a decent enough armory then." "Oh," Nami smirked saucily at him. "Don't worry about that. Usopp is making me a personalized one." Luffy got a bit excited at the sight of that smile on Nami's face, but he managed to control himself as he focused on her words. "A personalized one? What do you mean by that?" Nami blinked mischievously at him. "Let's just say I will be doing more than cutting and piercing with it." Luffy blinked at her a few times before shrugging his shoulders. "Okay then." Nami smiled up at him before she removed the distance between them and put her hands on his shoulders. Pushing herself up on her tiptoes, Nami gave Luffy a quick peck on the lips. With a light blush, she pulled back and giggled at his silly grin. "I'll take a break of training for now to check on the course. I know we have Nina, but we never can't be too careful, you know." "Sure," said Luffy before he leaned down and gave her his own peck on the lips. With one last smile, Nami walked away from him and she made sure to put the tiniest bit of extra sway to her hips as she did so. She could feel his smoldering gaze on her and it only made Nami smirk in satisfaction. "Go ahead, Luffy. Get as excited as you can. All the better for me when you finally crack." It frustrated Nami that despite her obvious willingness to go all the way with him, Luffy had never insisted on going beyond making out, dry humping and heavy petting. Sure, it's only been a week since they got together and they were already doing more than what most romantic partners would be doing at this point, but she just couldn't help herself. There was just something about Luffy that had her incredibly turned on whenever she thought about the more physical aspect of their new relationship. Nami huffed a bit in annoyance. "You clearly have the willingness to kill and take what you want of a real pirate. Why can't you be like one on this as well?" she lamented to herself as she picked up her map of East Blue and her compass. After a few moments of looking at it, her eyes gleamed in interest as she realized something. We are sailing the waters in which the Gold Island is supposed to be according to the rumors and legend. 1/3 of the world's treasures. Isn't there supposed to be a map detailing where Woonan hid his treasure?" After thoroughly enjoying the sight of Nami walking away from him, Luffy went to see how Usopp and Kaya were doing. Since they were closer to each other's level in regards to overall physical capability, they decided to train together. The two of them actually motivated each other to go beyond what they normally would, and that resulted in better results for both, so Luffy allowed them to continue training together. As he watched them go through some basic hand-to-hand combat kata for Kaya and his gun-fu katas for Usopp while wearing weights, Luffy inspected both their bodies with a critical eye. Despite her obvious improvements and surprising growth rate, Luffy knew that Kaya won't be ready to start learning the Rokushiki for a few months at the least. Usopp's own growth rate was superior to Kaya's, and he won't be ready to learn Zoro for at least 2 months. Luffy didn't really care how long it took them as long as he saw they were working hard, and the two of them most certainly were. While it had taken him less than a month of specialized training when he was 14 to become ready to learn the Rokushiki, and then more than a full year to learn and master all the techniques, Luffy knew that it was simply unfair to expect from others the same expected of himself. Luffy was well aware that his own growth rate was absurdly abnormal even compared to Zoro's, who was the one on his crew that was closest to him in that aspect. Captain, how can we help you?" Luffy blinked at the polite and out-of-breath voice pulling him out of his thoughts and saw that both Kaya and Usopp were looking at him with curious expression on their faces. He waved Kaya's question off with a grin and a dismissive hand motion. "It's nothing, you two. I was just watching you train and thinking about your progress. You guys keep at it. In no time I won't be embarrassed to admit you are members of my crew," he said with a teasing voice at the end. Usopp dramatically grasped his chest as he fell to the ground with a pained gasp. Please, such harsh words. My self-esteem can only take so much. Kaya just giggled at Usopp's over-the-top act before looking at her captain with a determined expression and saluting. Of course, Captain Luffy. Usopp-kun and I will work our hardest to make sure to not embarrass you in the future. I know you will, said Luffy with a chuckle before smirking at her. I think you are ready to start learning how to use your knives. I'll talk to Zoro, and if he can spare an hour or two every day from his oh-so-busy schedule to give you some basic lessons until you can develop your style further on your own. Kaya simply nodded at him. Usopp shot up to his feet and looked at Luffy with an expectant and eager expression on his face. And what about me, Luffy? Luffy laughed at his enthusiasm and sudden change of emotions. Usopp never failed to make Luffy laugh with his antics. I know you always hit your target, Usopp. I've seen the bullseyes inside the gun deck, he said and smirked when Usopp puffed up his chest and smugly rubbed in between his long nose and upper lip. But that being said, you only need to get stronger physically and more skilled at gun-fu for now. You will eventually reach the level at which you can learn Soru, Jeppo, Kami-e and Tekai. I shall keep proving myself, sir, declared Usopp with a salute followed by a cheesy thumb up that had Kaya giggling fondly and amusedly at him. Usopp had already decided gun-fu would be his basic style of fighting going forward, and he will become better at it as he gains strength, experience, and better guns and weapons. And the reason why Usopp decided to learn those 4 Rokushiki techniques were because Soru and Jeppo would afford him the mobility and maneuverability he would need as a gunslinger, and Kami-e and Tekai would give him the best chances to evade and block the attacks he couldn't counter. Luffy nodded at them before he left them to their training once again. He glanced towards where Sunny was and he saw that the Minion Lion was diligently working on mastering Soru. Luffy had decided Sunny would then learn Jeppo and Tekai. Afterwards it would be Rankyaku. Luffy still doubted Sunny could learn Kami-e since he wasn't human or humanoid. But he was sure Sunny could learn Shigen using his fangs somehow. There was still some time before they had to cross that bridge, so Luffy still wasn't exactly worried about it. He turned towards where Zoro was and smirked as his right hand wrapped around the handle of his saber. A quick application of Zoro when he disappeared in a flicker of movement, only for the sound of metal clashing against metal to resound through the entire ship as Luffy's saber met the blade of one of Zoro's unnamed sword. Luffy grinned at his first mate in challenge as he pushed forward. Care for a spar? Zoro grinned back at him around the handle of Wado Ikemanji as he pushed back against Luffy. You know I'm always up for it, Captain. What ensued next was a high-speed dance of clashing blades across the unoccupied parts of the main deck, like it was the norm between them. Zoro was clearly more skilled than Luffy with a sword, but Luffy surpassed Zoro in both speed and strength by such a wide margin that he could still keep up with Zoro in a purely swordsman duel. However, with Zoro knowing Soru now, Luffy had to put significantly more effort into it than before, which pleased him immensely. Kaya was only capable of hearing the sharp clangs generated by their bladed weapons. Usopp, thanks to his overdeveloped eyesight, was capable of making out their blurred forms. Nami was capable of barely following their movements when she began to watch the spar. She leaned against the railing of the upper deck that faced the main deck when she was finished checking and adjusting the course. She was only seeing the blurred forms of their bodies and weapons as they continued to fight. After a few minutes, Zoro suddenly appeared next to the mainmast panting harshly, covered in sweat and a few cuts here and there as his legs trembled slightly underneath him. Damn it, I still can't keep up with the strain it causes, he said between pants, but there was a grin on his face as he slowly recovered his breath. Luffy, who had appeared in front of him, was only covered in a bit of sweat as he returned Zoro's grin with one of his own. Keep up what you've been doing so far and you'll master it before you know it, assured Luffy as he sheathed his saber after flicking off the little bit of Zoro's blood that covered it because of the slight cuts he had given him during their spar. Zoro inclined his head at his captain. Thanks, I'll keep working on it, he said before he looked at Luffy in a challengingly manner. Before you know it, I will be showing you what a true swordsman can do at your own level, Captain. Maybe you'll finally learn a thing or two from me. Luffy smirked. I look forward to it. Seeing that they were done with their spar, Nami came down to the main deck and told Luffy that she was ready to continue training and that they were set to arrive to their destination in about a week or so if there weren't any complications. Luffy had told everyone they were heading to the Konomi Islands so he could challenge Arlong and prove that he was the top dog on East Blue. Since the true reason was Nami's story to tell, he had claimed that to be the reason why they were headed there. Since he was the captain, no one questioned him, though Luffy was sure that Zoro could tell there was something more to it. His first mate was more perceptive and intelligent than what he appeared and let on after all. For the rest of the morning, Luffy trained with Nami and Sunny, and that meant that he was throwing pebbles at them with enough strength to bruise their bodies. While this was done so Nami could learn Kami-e by attempting to dodge the rocky projectiles. Getting hit by them would also result in her toughening up the point she would learn Tekai. Sunny, however, was only withstanding getting hit by the pebbles since he was not trying to learn Kami-e. After Nami and Sunny went back to work on mastering Soru, Luffy performed his own training in Kenbenshoku Haki and Heishoku Haki for the next few hours. He knew that he needed to train Busashoku Haki as well, but he didn't want to reveal Haki to his crew yet. Since Kenbenshoku and Busashoku were within the abilities he wanted them to learn in the future, Luffy didn't want to put more pressure on their backs until he felt they could know about it without being overwhelmed by his expectations. Eventually, noon arrived, and with it lunchtime. It was while they were gathered around one of the tables of the kitchen bar that Mary had somehow managed to put inside the Tempest. While they were eating quite the decent lunch prepared by Nami, Kaya, and Usopp, the latter two having turned out to be capable of cooking, that the Orangeette pointed out where they were. "Did you guys know that we are currently sailing the waters on which Gold Island is supposed to be?" she asked before putting a piece of fried chicken into her mouth. Usopp swallowed his mouthful of mashed potatoes and looked at her in interest. "Isn't that the place Woonan, the man known as the Great Gold Pirate, who had a bounty of 60 million berry, hid all the gold he stole throughout his lifetime?" "Yep," chirped Nami as she nodded at him. Luffy smirked as he pointed at him with his half-eaten chicken drumstick. "El Drago is also supposed to sail these waters as well. He's rumored to have been looking for Woonan's treasure for years because of his obsession with gold. He has a bounty of 14 million berry. And," he trailed off as he turned towards Zoro with a smirk, "his first mate is a swordsman named Galas, who has a bounty of 8 million berry. If we run into them, he might give you an actual challenge outside of myself, eh?" Zoro drank from his mug of ale before returning Luffy's smirk. "Let's hope that comes to pass, Captain. I've been meaning to test myself against a proper swordsman ever since I joined your crew, you know." Luffy's eyebrow twitched a bit. "Oi, what's that supposed to mean? Are you insulting my skills, Zoro?" The green-haired first mate uncaringly shrugged his shoulders as he bit into his chicken wing. "If you feel like the shoe fits." As captain and first mate began to bicker, Kaya giggled in amusement as she watched while continuing to enjoy the food she helped prefer. Usopp was made sure the bickering extended on as he made a few stray commentaries here and there to edge Luffy and Zoro on while eagerly eating his lunch. Nami just watched on with fond exasperation before she decided to do her best to ignore the childish banter and focus on her meal. It would be later during the afternoon of that same day that the wishes of Luffy and Zoro would come true. 0:00. It was because Usopp was on the crow's nest that he spotted the small boat with 3 occupants sailing towards them a few hundred meters away. Since there was a high possibility of running into El Drago while they sailed these waters, Luffy gave Usopp the task of acting as the lookout because he had the mott chances of seeing anything with his eyesight. Usopp had done so without issues because the crow's nest had enough space for him to tinker away with his things, which is also why he hadn't spotted them sooner. "Oi," he called down at the others after looking towards the direction from which the boat was coming from and spotting over the horizon a ship. He used his spyglass in order to make out more details. 3 guys coming our way on a boat. They don't look friendly at all. There's also a ship coming towards us from the south. I have also spotted El Drago and Galas." Luffy, who had been cuddling with Nami on his hammock, gently released her from his arms before stepping down to the main deck proper with a grin on his face. "I'll make it up to you later, Nami," he promised her with a laugh when he saw her disappointed pout. She crossed her arms under her perky breasts, pushing them up in quite the enticing manner, and looked away petulantly. "You better." She had been enjoying the skin ship a lot after all. The fact that the others didn't bat an eyelash at their relationship, other than some teasing looks of course, made things even better. Sunny was an animal, and he couldn't care less even though it clearly confused him. Zoro simply couldn't care less, and Usopp and Kaya had their own thing going on. Luffy chuckled at her with a fond shake of his head. "Go ahead and alter our course so we are heading directly towards them. After that, go and tell Kaya what's happening so she's not surprised by the loud noises we are going to be making," he ordered her, and his lips twitched when she gave him a mock salute with a saucy smirk on her face before going to follow his instruction. "Little Minx," Zoro, who had been meditating while sitting cross-legged against the foremast, stood up and adjusted his swords to his haramaki as Luffy walked towards him. "How are we going to do this, Captain?" His expression was serious, but there was a noticeable undertone of excitement in his voice. He was clearly looking forward to the incoming bout of violence. Luffy smirked at him as the ship began to change directions, and he stood watching the incoming sailboat and behind it, quite outside of the range of their cannons, the ship that could only belong to El Drago. "Usopp, you and I will be doing all the fighting. Sunny will stay here with Nami and Kaya. Nami has to man the ship and Kaya isn't ready for fights of this scale yet. As for Nina," his smirk widened when he noticed the 3 occupants of the ship start to panic when they realized they had been noticed. "Let her take of those fools. Anyone affiliated with El Drago is scum since he is the type to not care what he does as long as he gets his goal." Zoro nodded in understanding. That meant no mercy today as well. He also quickly deduced that Luffy would be taking the both of them across the ocean using Jeppo. While it embarrassed him that he had to be carried by Luffy, it also motivated him to master Soru so he could learn the air jumping technique. Luffy looked up and shouted, "Usopp, You will snipe the cannon fodder from up there while Zoro and I fight against El Drago and Galas. Tell Nami to approach the ship when you see that everything is finished. Usopp took a hold of his flintlock rifle and sent a nod and a thumb up towards Luffy from where he was. Understood, Captain. He shouted back before he took his position and took aim towards the big ship that was now rapidly, in terms of naval speed of course, closing and using the iron sights of his long-range weapon in preparation for when they were finally within his range. Yup, I will use one of the spyglasses. We have to make some kind of scope for this, because the sheer speed of the Tempest. They quickly closed in on the small boat after they barely managed to turn around to try and escape from them. The panicked shouts of the three men quickly turned into screams of horror when Nina rose from the depths next to their ship, but those were abruptly cut off when she lunged in and swallowed them in a single bite. He had only noticed recently, but Luffy couldn't help but marvel at the rate at which Nina was starting to grow. It probably had to do with all the moving around she did nowadays plus her constant eating. Luffy was sure she wasn't going to become as big as the Sea Kings of the Calm Belt, but he wouldn't surprised if she at least doubled the size she had when he tamed her. It was just after Nina submerged again that Luffy noticed that the boat had another occupant. His eyebrows rose when he saw a small kid coming out from the single cabin of the boat. He could see that he was scared shitless as he trembled from head to toe while looking at the open sea around him. Let's go. Yeah. Luffy grabbed Zoro by the back of his shirt and jumped up. It took him 2 applications of Jeppo to reach the small boat and they landed behind the kid with a dull thud. Luffy released the hold he had on Zoro's shirt and he smiled down at the kid when he turned around to look at them with a pale face and wide, trembling eyes. He was a small boy with dark spiky hair. His outfit consisted of a light yellow shirt with a tan-brown waistcoat, a black cape with a flame design on the bottom and a red inside tied in a bow at the front. He had slightly torn brown shorts tied with an olive green sash and brown shoes. Luffy gave him a nonchalant 2-fingered salute. Yo, what's up with that lame greeting? He screamed while pointing at them and his face becoming a mix of fear and anger. Thought that Sea King ate the hyena 3. How? He began to hyperventilate as he slowly began to back away from them. Zoro clicked his tongue in annoyance and crossed his arms over his shoulder. Boy, calm down, kid. At least you weren't eaten by her. Consider yourself lucky. The boy looked at him blankly. Her. Luffy nodded with a grin. Yeah, her name is Nina. She is a member of our crew and she doesn't take too kindly to those that approach our ship with less than friendly intentions, he said, and he laughed at the kid's utter disbelief at that revelation. Luffy raised an eyebrow at him. What's your name, kid? And what are you doing working for El Drago? You don't look the type, you know. Zoro snorted. That was an understatement if he ever heard one. At his question, the kid got an angry look on his face as his fist tightened at his side. My name is Tobio, and I'm not working for El Drago. That bastard kidnapped me and forced me to work for him when I accidentally ran into him after he killed the remnants of Wunan's crew. He has the map that leads to Gold Island and where Wunan hid his treasure. Is that so? Luffy asked rhetorically before smirking, knowing that Nami will be extremely happy when she found that Wunan's legend might be more than just that. All the more reason to take him out then. All right, kid, we are going to free you from him. Just stay close to our ship while we deal with him, he said before he grabbed Zoro again by the back of his shirt and prepared to jump. Wait, shouted Tobio, and he elaborated when Luffy and Zoro looked at him curiously. El Drago ate a devil fruit. Those are real. When he shouts, he can shoot beams of sound strong enough to destroy a ship. I saw him do it to the ship of Wunan's crew after he kidnapped me. And that guy Galas is no joke. Luffy grinned at him. Thanks for the tip, but knowing that won't change a thing. El Drago dies today. Zoro also nodded. If he proves to be a disappointment, Galas dies as well. Under the wide eyes of Tobio, Luffy jumped towards the incoming ship and began to use Jeppo to jump off the air towards it at incredible speeds while carrying a disgruntled Zoro. Tobio couldn't help gasping at the sight. Just who the heck are those guys? He thought, and then yelped in fright when he caught sight of a glowing El Drago standing on the bow of the ship with his arms raised above his head. Oh shit, with Luffy and Zoro. The straw hat-wearing teen looked on curiously as a blue beam of sound was sent towards them at high speeds. That looks quite strong, he commented idly before grinning. Buckle up, Zoro. I can see Galas from here. I think I can make it. Zoro turned towards his captain with questioning eyes. What do you mean by? He was rudely interrupted when Luffy suddenly twirled around in the air to gather enough momentum to throw him towards the ship at about the same speed the blue beam was coming towards them. Motherfu. That was the last thing Luffy heard from Zoro before his scream was cut off by the sound of the beam coming towards him. Luffy could only laugh. Tekai, he declared before cocking his right fist back as he continued hop off the air towards the beam. As a master of Tekai, Luffy was capable of moving while using the technique and even used the other Rokushiki at the same time. As far as he knew, only his grandfather was capable of such a thing. When it was about to hit him, Luffy lashed out with his Tekai-enhanced fist and a shockwave was produced from the point of collision between his fist and the sound beam as well as a loud, booming sound. The water below him was disturbed in such a way that it looked like a gigantic boulder had been thrown into it. The sound beam was dispersed and Luffy continued using Jeppo to approach the ship while looking at his hand with a disappointed expression on his face. I barely felt that. I can already tell this is going to be boring, he mumbled to himself before he finally reached the ship. As he looked down while hopping in place, Luffy suddenly burst out laughing as he pointed at the tallest figure there looking up at him in shock. You look more like a cat in person than you do in your poster. El Drago, more like El Gato. El Drago was a dark-skinned, red-haired man that resembled a cat in appearance as noted by Luffy. As proof of his extensive love of gold, he wore shoulder pad armor made off an alloy of the stuff with a white shirt underneath, and Luffy could see that he had sharp golden nails as well. On a side note, his ship was a fair representation of his personality and appearance, being covered with gold plating and having a lion for a figurehead. When he heard the strange team that had somehow blocked his sound beam saying that he looked like a cat, El Drago's shock was quickly substituted by anger. Then, shoot him down, Golas. He turned towards his first mate and his eyes widened when he saw him fighting who he recognized as pirate hunter Roronoa Zoro and clearly being overwhelmed quite easily by the user of the Santorio. What in the? El Drago suddenly saw one of his men drop down to the deck with a bullet hole on his head. He could only watch with wide eyes as other members of his crew began to suffer the same fate despite scattering around and not staying still. What the fuck is going on? He screamed as he began to glow with the power of his Gogo no Mai while looking up at whom had to be the cause of what was happening. Luffy smirked savagely down at him as he watched every single shot of Usopp's hit its mark. That would be the work of my master gunner, he said before he was forced to jump higher off the air to evade another sound beam from El Drago. Luffy looked down at him chidingly. That was rude. I have come for everything you own, and the bounty on your head. You are the kind of scumbag I can't stand sailing the seas doing as he wishes, you see, he said as he landed in front of him, surrounded by the bodies of his dead crew. El Drago bared his teeth at him as he brandished his gleaming golden claws. If you think I'll let you take my gold, you have another fucking thing coming. I will kill you. The fact that El Drago cared more about his gold than the fate of his crewmates was further proof on the kind of man that he was. Luffy rolled his eyes at him as he unsheathed his saber. For some reason, I highly doubt that, he said right before El Drago charged at him with the clear intention of reducing him to shreds using his claws. He smirked as he slowly got into his stance. So, you think you can dance, huh? With Zoro, as he used his two unnamed swords to block and counter Golas' sword strikes with laughable ease. Zoro had a disappointed expression on his face. He might have a lot of physical strength, but his technique is barely decent. I can even tell that he doesn't even believe in himself. Damn it, another waste of time, he thought to himself as he blocked a two-handed vertical slash coming from above with his left sword and countered with a diagonal slash from his left sword. Gah! Screamed Golas as he failed to evade the attack by jumping back. A deep cut appeared across his torso that began to bleed profusely. Since he was left-handed, Golas grasped at it with his right hand as he glared to the man in front of him while grimacing in pain and panting. Roronoa, Zoro. Zoro looked at him with apathetic eyes. If you weren't the trash I know you to be, I would have given you the chance to perhaps find your drive to become a true swordsman, he said before his eyes tightened and he crossed his two swords across his chest and placed Wado Ikemonji horizontally behind them. However, my captain gave his orders. You only have yourself to blame. Golas' eyes widened as he was frozen still due to feeling Zoro's killing intent and bloodthirstiness being directed at him. Zoro seemingly disappeared in a flicker of movement, onigiri, and reappeared behind Golas with his arms extended at his sides, kneeling down and his head lowered. Blood spurted from Golas' torso as he fell to his knees and his sword fell the wood of the deck. His head then fell to the side of his body before his body slumped forward into the deck with a dull thud. A pool of blood quickly formed around him. Zoro rose to his feet before he flicked the blood off his unnamed swords and sheathed them. He then took Wado Ikemonji from his mouth and flicked off the blood from its blade as well before sheathing it. Zoro removed his bandana from his head and tied it around his arm. He clicked his tongue in annoyance. Am I going to find someone on the East Blue that can give me an actual challenge? He wondered before he turned towards where Luffy was fighting El Drago. He idly noticed that El Drago's crew was very much dead. Back with Luffy, the black-haired teen had a bored expression on his face as he blocked the claw strikes from El Drago using his saber. Man, this guy is a fucking joke. My spars with Zoro are more challenging. Oh well, thought Luffy before he twisted his wrist so instead of blocking El Drago's next strike, he removed his right with one clean swipe. El Drago looked at the sudden bloody stump with a blank expression on his face before it contorted in agony when blood began to spurt out of it. Luffy's eyebrows rose a bit when he began to glow in a way that told him that he was about to use the power of his devil fruit. El Drago looked like he was going to scream in pain as he held his right arm right beneath where the bleeding stump was. Luffy didn't feel like listening to his screams, so with a quick sword and an horizontal slash from his saber, El Drago's head was removed from his body. With a dispassionate expression on his face, Luffy ignored the pooling blood as he flicked off the blood from his saber and sheathed it back. Taking care to not bloody his boots, Luffy approached El Drago's body and with a quick and efficient search found what had to be Wunan's map. A quick check confirmed it. Nami is going to be extra happy, he thought to himself with a silly grin as he rolled the parchment of the map back up. Ignoring the dead bodies littering the deck of El Drago's ship, he turned towards Zoro. Let's go procure our loot. I'm sure El Drago has some treasure of his own and other resources that we can find useful. We'll look after Wunan's treasure after we are done here. Zoro nodded in agreement and understanding of Luffy's instruction and reasoning. Aye, Captain, he said before vaguely motioning towards the dead bodies around them. I suppose they are going to be Nina's meal, right? Shouldn't we deal with that first? Luffy tilted his head a bit, nodded and shrugged his shoulders. Yeah, sure. We only need the heads of El Drago and Gallas, and we already made things easy for ourselves on that end, he said uncaringly before he recalled something as he gave El Drago's decapitated body a thoughtful look. I wonder where his devil fruit is going to reappear. It might have been weak, but I'm sure it was more because of El Drago than the ability of the fruit itself. With nothing else to say, the two of them got to work. They threw the dead bodies into the sea, and before Luffy did so to El Drago's body, he made sure to procure everything made of gold that was on his person, which included his armor and his nails. By the time the Tempest finished its approach, they had finished the gruesome task, located the treasury, and got a rough idea of its worth. The only sign of the bloody massacre that took place on El Drago's ship was the blood pooled on its deck, with the heads of El Drago and Gallas inside a bag. Luffy easily jumped between ships and looked at the rest of his crew and Tobio. Nami only had an expectant look on her face, clearly wanting to know how much they gained, not counting the bounties. Luffy knew that she had witnessed her fair share of messed up stuff, and with her greed being a prominent aspect of her personality, he wasn't surprised. Even though she was somewhat successful in hiding it, Luffy could tell that Kaya was bothered by the sight of all that blood. Luckily, she wasn't looking at him, Zoro, or Usopp in fear or disgust. As a matter of fact, she smiled at Usopp gratefully when the master gunner put his hand on her shoulder in a clearly supportive manner. Sunny, when it became apparent that he wasn't really needed at the moment, yawned widely before lazily turning around and starting to make his way towards his room. Tobio was just looking up at him with his expression and body frozen in shock. So, began to say Nami with a clear air of eagerness and impatience around her. Luffy grinned and lightly shook the bag containing the heads of the latest bounty he was planning on cashing in. El Drago and Gallas turned out to be the definition of easy money. Zoro and I dealt with them without breaking a sweat, he said before turning towards the master gunner and giving him a thumb up. Nice work, Usopp. Not a miss and all perfect headshots, as expected from my master gunner. Usopp puffed up in pride as he returned Luffy's gesture with a grin and a thumb up of his own. Happy to not disappoint, sir. Next to him, Kaya giggled in amusement as she shook her head fondly. You've got 22 million burries there, right? Asked Nami for confirmation as she gave an upwards nod to the bag inside which Luffy was carrying the heads of El Drago and Gallas. Did you check their treasury? How much did they have? Any useful resources we can take for ourselves? Luffy chuckled at her eagerness and nodded in confirmation at her first question before answering the other ones. Yes, Zoro and I checked it. It's mostly stuff made of gold, but I'm pretty sure they are worth a lot of money. They had a decent amount of burries, but I doubt it would be more than 10 million. As for resources, Zoro and I only saw ship repairing materials and tools, food, alcohol, and weapons. About what we were expecting then. A bit more perhaps, she asked and smiled when Luffy made a kind of gesture with his unoccupied hand. All right, I'm pretty sure we are going to be taking it all. What is our next move? She asked him with a certain pointedness. Luffy smirked at her knowingly. After we move our stuff from El Drago's ship to the Tempest, I was thinking about going on a treasure hunt, he said before pulling out Wunan's map and lobbing it at her. He grinned at the sight of ecstatic Nami greedily unfolding it and confirming that Wunan's legend was very much real and that they were going to find 1/3 of the world's treasure now that they were in possession of his map. Nami was sure that he also very much enjoyed the subsequent quick make-out session. With a pleased expression and blush on her face, Nami pulled back and mock scowled at the silly expression on Luffy's face as she unwrapped her arms from around his neck and began to push him away. Oi, what are you waiting for? Get to work. My treasure is waiting for me. Luffy got back his mental faculties and lazily nodded while giving her a mock salute. Yeah, no need to be so pushy, geez, he said before turning towards the others, smirking when he saw the way Usopp and Kaya were blushing and glancing at each other. Oi, lovebirds, let's get to it. You can try what Nami and I do later after we are done. Giving a loud eep, Kaya's entire face went beet red and she looked away from Usopp, refusing to look at him anymore. Usopp, with his entire face just as red, looked ready to shove one of his guns up Luffy's ass before firing it multiple times. Luffy's grin was unrepentant. Tobio just continued on looking at them in shock and awe. Two of them dealt with El Drago and his crew like they were nothing. And not only do they have a Sea King as their pet, but there's also a Menian lion. Who the hell are these guys? That was when Nami spoke again. She pointed at the shortest person there. Oh, Luffy, before you go, what are going to do about Tobio? When he saw Luffy turning towards him with a thoughtful expression, Tobio couldn't help start trembling. Despite not treating him badly so far, he had just kind of witnessed these people massacre El Drago and his crew without a care in the world. He couldn't help being scared shitless. As he stood there waiting for the decision of whom he started to see was the captain of this crew of monsters, Tobio couldn't help but wish for his grandfather. Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed the video, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.